I drove 6 hours through a blizzard to my mountain lodge seeking peace, only to find my own son and his in-laws living there like kings. When my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and asked why a bottom feeder like me was dirtying her porch, I did not scream. I did not fight. I simply walked back to my truck and made one phone call that would turn their paradise into a frozen hell. If you have ever been underestimated by the people you sacrificed everything for, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next is the justice we all crave. My name is Winston Calloway. I am 68 years old, and for the last decade I have let the world believe I am nothing more than a retired man living on a fixed pension. I drive a rusted 1998 Chevy Silverado. I wear flannel shirts from the thrift store, and I spend my days fishing in the creek. It is a simple life, a quiet life. It is the life my late wife Coretta and I chose after 40 years of swimming with the sharks in the commercial real estate market. We sold the empire, but we kept the power buried deep where no one could see it. But today, that silence ended. It was the 10th anniversary of Coretta's passing. Every year on this day, I drive up to the Blackwood Ridge Lodge. It sits on 400 acres of pristine mountain wilderness. It was the first property I ever bought with my music production royalties back in the late 70s before I pivoted to real estate. It is my sanctuary. It is where Coretta's spirit lives. I just wanted to sit by the fire, play her favorite jazz records on our Steinway piano, and drink a bottle of the vintage red wine we saved for special occasions. The drive up the mountain was treacherous. The snow was falling in thick sheets, blanketing the pines in white. My old truck groaned as it climbed the winding gravel road, but it never quit on me. That truck is a lot like me. It looks beat up on the outside, but the engine is solid steel. When I finally pulled up the long driveway, my heart stopped. There were lights on. Not just the security lights, but every single light in the lodge was blazing. The driveway, which should have been empty, was filled. A white Range Rover, a Porsche Cayenne, and a bright red convertible that had no business being on a snowy mountain. My stomach tightened. I thought perhaps I had been robbed. I thought squatters had broken in. I grabbed my heavy flashlight from the glove box, not as a weapon but for comfort, and stepped out into the biting cold. I walked up the timber stairs to the massive front porch. I reached into my pocket for my key ring. The brass key I have carried for 30 years was warm in my hand. I went to slide it into the deadbolt, but metal hit plastic. I frowned and leaned in closer, wiping the snow off the door handle. My breath hitched. The lock was gone. My solid brass deadbolt had been replaced by a sleek black digital keypad with a biometric fingerprint scanner. A blue light pulsed rhythmically, mocking me. I stood there freezing and confused. I tried to push the door, but it was sealed tight. Who changes the locks on a man's house without telling him? I pounded on the door. The wood vibrated under my fist. "Open up," I shouted, my voice cracking from the cold and the rising anger. "I own this place. Open this door." I heard footsteps inside. Heavy, confident footsteps. The electronic lock chirped a cheerful little melody, and the heavy oak door swung open. A wave of warmth and the smell of expensive wood smoke hit my face. But it wasn't my son Terrence standing there. It was a white man I had never met in my life. He looked to be about my age, but softer. His face was flushed red from alcohol and heat. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a crystal wine glass. My crystal wine glass. And in that glass was a dark red liquid that looked suspiciously like my 1982 Bordeaux. But that wasn't what made my blood boil. He was wearing my jacket, my vintage hunting jacket with the leather patches on the elbows, the one Coretta gave me for our 25th anniversary, the one I kept hanging by the door ready for my walks. He had it draped over his shoulders like a cape. "Can I help you?" the man slurred, looking me up and down with eyes glazed over by arrogance and wine. He didn't see a homeowner. He saw an old black man in a worn-out parka standing in the snow. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "What are you doing in my house?" The man let out a bark of laughter. "Your house." "You must be confused, old-timer. The delivery entrance is around back near the kitchen. And next time wipe your boots before you step onto the porch. You are getting slush everywhere." He took a sip of my wine and grimaced. "God, this service is terrible. I told Terrence to hire better help. Now go around back before I call the police for trespassing." He moved to slam the door in my face. I jammed my boot into the gap. The door shuddered. "I am not the help," I growled, pushing the door back. "I am Winston Calloway, and you are wearing my coat." Before the man could respond, a voice called out from the living room. "Frank, who is it? Is it the caterer for tomorrow?" Then my son appeared. Terrence, my only child. He walked into the hallway, wiping his hands on a towel. When he saw me, his eyes didn't fill with warmth. They didn't fill with surprise. They filled with pure, unadulterated panic. "Dad," he whispered, the color draining from his face. Frank the stranger turned to Terrence and gestured at me with the wine glass. "You know this guy, Terrence. He says this is his house. He is getting aggressive." Terrence rushed forward, but he didn't come to hug me. He came to shove me. He grabbed my arm and physically pulled me out of the doorway, dragging me toward the shadows of the porch pillars, away from the warm light of the entry. "Dad, what the hell are you doing here?" Terrence hissed, his voice shaking. "You were supposed to be at the apartment in the city. You never come up here in December." I yanked my arm away from his grip. "I come here every year for your mother's anniversary, Terrence. You know that. Who is that man inside? Why are my keys useless? Why is he drinking my wine?" Terrence looked back at the door, terrified that Frank might hear us. "That is Frank, Madison's father. Look, Dad, you have to leave. You can't be here right now." "I have to leave," I repeated, incredulous. "This is my property, Terrence. The deed is in my safe." "Not anymore," Terrence mumbled, looking at his shoes. "Well, technically yes, but we are using it. Madison told her parents we bought it." "Okay, we told them it is our vacation home. You showing up here in that truck looking like that. It ruins everything." I looked at my son. He was wearing a watch that cost more than my truck. A watch I knew he couldn't afford on his salary as a mid-level marketing manager. I looked at the fear in his eyes. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear of being exposed. "You told them you bought my lodge?" I asked quietly. "We are just borrowing it, Dad," Terrence pleaded. "Frank and Betsy are staying for 2 weeks. They are important people, Dad. Frank is an investor. If he thinks I am living off my daddy, he won't respect me. I need this. Please, just get in your truck and go. I will pay for a hotel for you down in the valley." He was ashamed of me. He was ashamed of the man who worked double shifts at the construction site to pay for his private school tuition. He was ashamed of the man who built a legacy so he would never have to struggle. Before I could answer, the door swung open wide again. This time it was Madison, my daughter-in-law. She stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. She was wearing a white silk robe that swept the floor. She looked like an ice queen, and her eyes were just as cold. "Terrence, what is taking so long?" she snapped. Her eyes landed on me, and her lip curled in a sneer of absolute disgust. She didn't see a father-in-law. She saw a stain. "Oh God," she groaned, rolling her eyes. "I thought I heard that rattletrap truck pull up." "Terrence, I thought we discussed this." "Madison, please," Terrence stammered, stepping between us. "He just stopped by to check the pipes." "He is leaving. He better be leaving," Madison said, stepping closer, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "My parents are inside, Terrence. Do you know what they will think if they see this?" She gestured at me with a manicured hand. "Look at him. He looks like a vagrant. He smells like old fish and gasoline." I stiffened. I had spent the morning fixing the generator at the community center. I smelled like hard work, something she wouldn't recognize. "Madison, this is my house," I said, my voice steady. Madison laughed. A cruel, high-pitched sound. "It is our house, Winston. Terrence handles the bills. Terrence handles the maintenance. You are just a name on a piece of paper that we are going to fix very soon. Now get off my porch." She turned to Terrence, her face twisting into a scowl. "Get rid of him, Terrence. Right now. If my mother sees us associating with a bottom feeder like him, she will have a heart attack. We are trying to build a reputation here. We don't need him dragging us down to the gutter." Bottom feeder. The words hung in the frozen air. I looked at Terrence, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to tell his wife that without me they would be living in a studio apartment, waiting for him to be a man. Terrence didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. "Dad, please, just go. Do it for me." That was the moment. That was the moment the cord snapped. The unconditional love of a father collided with the cold, hard reality of disrespect. I looked at the three of them, Frank in the doorway swilling my wine, Madison sneering in her silk robe, Terrence cowering like a beaten dog. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my fist. I simply nodded once. "Fine," I said. I turned my back on them and walked down the stairs into the snow. "Thank God," Madison huffed behind me. "And take that ugly truck with you. It is an eyesore." I heard the heavy door slam shut and the electronic lock engage with a mechanical whir. I walked to my truck, my boots crunching on the ice. I climbed into the cab and slammed the door. My hands were shaking not from the cold, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I sat there in the dark for a moment watching the warm glow of the lodge. My lodge. I could see shadows moving in the window. They were laughing. They were toasting. They thought they had won. They thought the old man had been shamed into submission. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my burner phone. The one I use for the business dealings I keep separate from my quiet life. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. It rang once. Mr. Calloway. A voice answered crisp and alert. To what do I owe the pleasure? It was Mr. Rossi, my personal attorney and the man who knows where every single body is buried in this town. Rossi, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I am at the Mountain Lodge. Enjoying the anniversary, Sir Rossi asked. No, I said. I want you to pull the title on the lodge, check for any recent filings, any liens, any transfers, and Rossi checked the status of the trust fund accounts for Terrence and Madison. There was a pause on the line. The sound of typing. Is there a problem, sir? There is a big problem, Rossi. I want you to freeze everything. The cards, the accounts, the access, and I want you to find out exactly what paperwork my son has forged to get a digital lock on my front door. Consider it done, Rossi said, his tone shifting from polite to predatory. Should I send the security team? Not yet, I said, watching the silhouette of Frank pouring another glass of my wine in the window. I am going to stay here tonight. Sir, you are going to sleep in the truck. No, I said, staring at the tool shed detached from the main house. I am going to sleep in the shed. They want a bottom feeder. I will give them a bottom feeder. But Rossi, yes, sir, get the eviction papers ready and dig into Frank and Betsy Miller. I want to know how much they owe and who they owe it to. If they are eating my food, I want to know who paid for their silverware. Understood. I hung up the phone. I looked at the main house one last time. They wanted to play pretend. They wanted to pretend they were the royalty of Blackwood Ridge. Fine, I would let them play. I started the truck and moved it around the back near the shed out of sight of the main driveway, just as a servant would. I grabbed my sleeping bag and my thermos. Tonight I sleeps with the lawnmowers, but tomorrow the gardening begins, and I have a lot of weeds to pull. The vibration of the burner phone in my pocket felt like a warning shot against my thigh. I sat in the darkness of my truck cab watching the golden light spill from the windows of my own lodge. Inside, I could see Frank laughing, his head thrown back while my son poured him another glass of my wine. I answered the phone without taking my eyes off them. Mr. Calloway. Rossi's voice was tight. It was the tone he used when a deal was going south or when he found a structural crack in a foundation. I did what you asked. I pulled the county records digitally. Tell me, I said, my breath forming clouds in the freezing cab. The deed is still in your name, Winston, but there is a lien filed against the property, and a lease agreement recorded with the county clerk just 3 weeks ago. A lease, I repeated quietly. Yes, sir. A 10-year lease agreement granting full residential rights to one Terrence Calloway and Madison Calloway. The rent is listed as $1 per year. And Winston. Go on, it has your signature on it, not a digital stamp. A wet signature, or at least a very good forgery of one. It was notarized by a man named Paulie Gantz. Do you know him? I let out a short, bitter breath. Paulie Gantz, a 2-bit paralegal who used to run errands for my old firm before I fired him for skimming petty cash. So my son wasn't just a squatter. He was a fraudster. He had committed a felony to impress his wife. They forged my name, Rossi. I assumed as much, sir. This changes things. This is not a civil dispute anymore. This is criminal fraud. I can have the sheriff there in 20 minutes. We can have them in cuffs before dessert. I looked at the house again. I saw Madison walk past the window. She was holding a painting, one of Coretta's paintings. She gestured with it, mocking it, and then set it face down on a side table to use as a coaster for her drink. No police, I said. Not yet. Sir, with all due respect, they stole your house. They stole more than a house, Rossi. They stole my trust. If I call the police now, they will play the victim. They will say the old man is senile. They will say I forgot I signed it. I need more than a forgery. I need a confession. I need them to show me exactly who they are when they think no one is watching. What are you going to do? I am going to stay. Dig deeper, Rossi. I want to know where they got the money for the renovation materials. I want to know who paid for that digital lock. And Rossi, find out if Frank Miller has any outstanding judgments. He drinks like a man who is trying to forget a debt. I will get on it. Stay safe, Winston. I ended the call. My hands were steady now. The shock had faded, replaced by a cold mechanical resolve. I needed a reason to stay. A reason that wouldn't raise their suspicions. A reason a bottom feeder would have. I popped the hood of my Chevy. I grabbed a pair of pliers from my toolbox. With a quick, precise motion, I yanked the main fuse for the fuel pump and slipped it into my pocket. I tried to start the engine. It cranked and sputtered and died. Perfect. Now I wasn't just unwanted. I was stranded. I walked back up to the porch. The wind had picked up, cutting through my flannel shirt like a knife. I rang the digital doorbell. I heard the chime echo inside, followed by a groan. Oh, for God's sake, Madison's voice drifted through the door. He is back. Terrence, get rid of him. The door opened. Terrence stood there looking more exhausted than I had ever seen him. He was my son, but in that moment he looked like a stranger. Dad, he hissed, keeping his voice low. I told you to leave. Frank and Betsy are asking questions. They think you are a maintenance man who is harassing us. My truck died, I said loud enough for the room to hear. Fuel pump gave out. It is a blizzard out there, Terrence. I can't walk down the mountain. I will freeze to death before I hit the main road. Terrence looked past me at the truck, then back at me. Panic danced in his eyes. He didn't know what to do. He was terrified of his wife, but he wasn't quite ready to let his father die of hypothermia. Let me call a tow truck, he said, reaching for his phone. In this weather, I asked. No tow truck is coming up Blackwood Ridge tonight, son. You know that. Who is it? Madison appeared behind him, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked at me with pure venom. You again. Why are you still here? His truck broke down, Terrence said weakly. He says he is stuck. Madison let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Of course it did. That implies it was ever working properly to begin with. Well, he can't stay here, Terrence. We have guests. Where is he supposed to sleep? On the sofa. My mother is allergic to dust and he is covered in it. I stood there silent, letting her words wash over me. I owned the rug she was standing on. I paid for the roof over her head. And she was talking about me like I was a stray dog. Please, Madison, I said, injecting a tremor into my voice, playing the part of the frail old man. It is 10 degrees below zero. I just need a corner. Anywhere. Madison looked at me, her eyes narrowing. She took a sip of her champagne, tapping a manicured fingernail against the glass. A smile slowly spread across her face. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who just found a use for a broken tool. Fine, she said. You can stay. Terrence let out a breath. Thanks, honey. I will get the guest room No, Madison cut him off. Not the guest room. The Millers are using the guest suite, and we are using the master. Then where? Terrence asked. The shed, Madison said, pointing a long finger toward the back of the property. The gardening shed. It has a roof. It has 4 walls. If he wants shelter, he can sleep there. The shed, Terrence stammered. Madison, there is no heat in there. It is full of lawnmowers. It is better than a snowbank, Madison countered. Besides, if he is going to stay, he needs to earn his keep. The driveway is a mess, Terrence. The snow is piling up. If Frank wants to take the Range Rover out tomorrow morning, that driveway needs to be clear. She turned her cold gaze back to me. That is the deal, Winston. You can sleep in the shed. But tomorrow morning, bright and early, you shovel the driveway. Every inch of it. And the walkways. And the deck. If I see a single snowflake when I wake up, you are walking down the mountain. I looked at my son. I waited for him to say no. I waited for him to say that his father, a man with arthritis in his knees, was not going to sleep in a tool shed and shovel snow like a servant. Terrence looked at the floor. He rubbed the back of his neck. It has a cot in there, Dad. And some old blankets. It might not be too bad. Just for one night, I felt a piece of my heart turn into stone. My son wasn't just weak. He was complicit. Fine, I said softly. The shed. And Winston Madison added as I turned to leave. Stay out of the main house. If you need to use the bathroom, there is a utility sink in the garage. Do not come inside. We have a reputation to maintain, and I don't want you ruining the aesthetic. I walked away from the warmth of the entry. I trudged through the knee-deep snow around the side of the massive lodge. The wind howled through the pine trees. My hands were numb by the time I reached the detached tool shed. I fumbled with the latch. It was frozen stiff. I had to use my shoulder to force the door open. It groaned on rusty hinges. I stepped inside and turned on my flashlight. The air inside was stale and freezing colder than the outside because it was damp. The beam of my light cut through the dust motes. It was a large shed meant for storing the tractor and the heavy equipment we used to maintain the property. I scanned the room looking for the cot Terrence had mentioned. I saw it pushed against the far wall, buried under a pile of drop cloths. But that wasn't what caught my eye. In the corner, piled haphazardly like garbage, was a stack of canvases. I walked over my boots, echoing on the concrete floor. I knelt down, my knees popping in the cold. I pulled the top canvas free. It was a watercolor, a painting of this very mountain in the spring. Coretta had painted it 3 years before she died. She had spent weeks on the shading of the trees trying to get the green just right. It was her favorite piece. We had hung it over the fireplace in the main lodge. Now it was here, in a damp shed. I shone the light further into the corner. There was a box, a cardboard box that had started to sag from the moisture. I opened the flaps. Inside were vinyl records. Original pressings of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Ella Fitzgerald. My collection, the collection Coretta and I had built together visiting jazz clubs in New Orleans and Chicago. They were thrown in the box without their sleeves, scratched, warped from the cold, ruined. I stood up, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I swept my flashlight beam to the other side of the shed. There, occupying the dry clean shelves where my tools used to be, was a set of brand new ski equipment. High-end skis still in the plastic, designer snowboards, expensive thermal gear with the tags still on. They had cleared out my wife's legacy. They had taken the art she created with her dying hands and the music that had been the soundtrack of our lives, and they had thrown it into the dirt to make room for toys. They didn't just steal my house. They erased my history. They erased her. I felt a tear freeze on my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated rage. I looked at the skis. I looked at the name printed on the travel bag, Frank Miller. So the squatter had better accommodations for his skis than for the man who owned the mountain. I reached out and touched Coretta's painting. The frame was cracked. The canvas was damp. I wiped the dust from it with my sleeve. "I am sorry, Cora," I whispered to the empty room. I let them in. I raised a boy who didn't know the value of anything. I sat down on the freezing cot. I didn't unroll my sleeping bag. I didn't try to get warm. I let the cold seep into my bones. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to remember this shivering, this indignity. Tomorrow I would shovel their snow. Tomorrow I would clear their path. I would be the good little servant. I would be the bottom feeder they wanted. But while I shoveled, I would be planning. Every scoop of snow would be a shovel full of dirt on their graves. They wanted to play Lord of the Manor. Fine. But they forgot one thing. The manor has a master, and he is sitting in the garden shed waiting for the sun to rise. I pulled out my phone again. I sent one text message to Rossi. They threw Coretta's things in the trash. Initiate the scorched earth protocol. I want the bank accounts frozen by noon tomorrow. And Rossi, find out where Terrence pawned the silver. I know it is gone. I put the phone away. I wrapped myself in the drop cloth huddled next to the ruined paintings of my wife. I didn't sleep. I watched the spider webs in the rafters and I waited. The cold was no longer my enemy. It was my fuel. And tomorrow, the heat was going to rise. The sun had not yet cleared the peaks of the Blackwood Ridge when I started shoveling. The air was a razor against my exposed skin. My breath puffed out in white clouds that vanished instantly in the biting wind. I had been at it for 2 hours, scraping the ice from the slate pavers of the wrap-around porch. My back ached. My knees, which had carried me through construction sites and boardrooms for 40 years, screamed in protest. But I kept a rhythm. Scrape, lift, toss. It was the rhythm of a man who knows that physical labor is honest even when the people commanding it are not. I was working near the massive bay window of the dining room when I heard a sharp rapping sound on the glass. I stopped and looked up. Inside the lodge it looked warm. A fire was roaring in the hearth. Seated at the head of my dining table was Betsy Miller. She was wearing a plush cream-colored sweater and holding a steaming mug of coffee. She looked at me not with gratitude but with the kind of annoyance one reserves for a fly buzzing against a screen. She tapped the glass again with a manicured fingernail. She pointed to a spot on the window right at her eye level. There was a smudge of frost there. She made a circular motion with her hand, mimicking a rag. She wanted me to clean the window so she could have a better view of the snow she wasn't standing in. I stared at her. I owned the glass she was tapping on. I owned the chair she was sitting in. I owned the coffee beans she was brewing. But in that moment, I was just the help. I was the bottom feeder. I took a rag from my back pocket. I wiped the frost away. Betsy nodded once curtly and turned back to her breakfast. She didn't mouth thank you. She simply accepted my servitude as her due. A moment later, the side door opened. I thought perhaps she was bringing me a cup of coffee. I thought maybe there was a shred of humanity in her. Betsy stepped out onto the porch just far enough to keep her slippers dry. She held a napkin in her hand. Here, she said, tossing something toward me. It landed in the snow by my boot. It was the heel of a piece of toast. Dry. Burnt. The part no one wanted. You look like you are slowing down, she said, her voice carrying a tone of charitable condescension. Keep your energy up. Frank wants the walkway clear before he wakes up. He hates getting snow in his loafers. She turned and went back inside, locking the door behind her with a definitive click. I looked at the piece of toast lying in the snow. It was the kind of scrap you throw to a stray dog. My hands gripped the handle of the snow shovel so hard the wood creaked. I wanted to pick up that shovel and shatter the window. I wanted to storm in there and throw them all out into the blizzard. But I didn't. I kicked snow over the toast, burying it. I wasn't a dog, and I wasn't going to eat their scraps. I went back to shoveling. Scrape, lift, toss. Every motion was a promise. Every cleared paver was a step closer to the reckoning. By the time I finished the front walk, my fingers were numb inside my gloves. My throat felt like I had swallowed broken glass. I needed water. I needed to feel my toes again. Madison had banished me to the shed, but I knew the code to the side service entrance, the one that led into the mudroom. They probably hadn't figured out how to change that one yet because it was hidden behind the woodpile. I checked the windows. The dining room was empty now. Betsy must have moved to the living room. I slipped around the side of the house and punched the code into the keypad. It beeped softly and unlocked. I stepped into the mudroom and the warmth hit me like a physical blow. The smell of the house was familiar yet wrong. It smelled of expensive perfume and stale wine, not the scent of cedar and sage that Coretta always kept. I pulled off my wet boots and crept in my socks toward the kitchen. I drank tap water from my cupped hands, standing over the utility sink. It was the sweetest water I had ever tasted. I just wanted to warm up for a minute before retreating back to my exile. But silence drew me toward the great room. The main living area of the lodge was a masterpiece of architecture with vaulted ceilings and a floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace. I walked to the doorway and froze. My eyes scanned the room, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The furniture had been rearranged. My comfortable leather armchairs were pushed against the walls. In the center of the room, they had placed a white shag rug that looked ridiculous against the rustic timber. But that wasn't what stopped my heart. I looked toward the corner by the east window. That was the spot. That was the sacred ground. For 30 years, that corner had been occupied by a 1960 Steinway Model B grand piano. It was ebony black, polished to a mirror shine. I had bought it for Coretta with the first big check I ever wrote. She played it every evening. Even when she got sick, even when her hands were weak, she would sit there and play Debussy and Ellington. That piano was her voice. It was the soul of this house. It was gone. Isha Maria. The corner was empty of music. In its place stood a monstrosity, a portable bar made of chrome and frosted glass. It was lit from within by pulsating purple LED lights. It looked like something stolen from a cheap nightclub in Miami. It was tacky. It was soulless. And it was sitting on the grave of my wife's memory. I walked over to it, my legs feeling heavy and weak. I touched the cold chrome. There were rings from wet glasses on the surface, sticky spots from spilled liquor. They had replaced a $50,000 instrument of pure art with a piece of furniture that probably cost $500 at a discount store. "Where is it?" I whispered to the empty room. I felt a panic rising in my chest. A piano doesn't just disappear. You don't misplace a Steinway. I heard a noise behind me. I spun around. Terrence was standing there. He was wearing a silk robe that was too big for him, and he looked hungover. His eyes were puffy, and he was holding a bottle of aspirin. He jumped when he saw me. "Dad," he hissed, looking over his shoulder. "I told you to stay outside. Madison will flip if she sees you in here. You are tracking melting snow on the rug." I didn't care about the rug. I didn't care about Madison. I pointed a trembling finger at the chrome bar. "Where is it, Terrence? Where is your mother's piano?" Terrence rolled his eyes and opened the aspirin bottle, shaking 2 pills into his mouth. He swallowed them dry before answering. He didn't even look at the spot. He treated the question like I was asking about an old newspaper. Oh, that thing. We got rid of it. Got rid of it. I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Yeah, Dad, it was huge. It took up the whole room. Madison said it made the place look like a funeral home. It was dusty and old and nobody plays it anyway. We needed the space for entertaining. Entertaining, I said the word tasting like bile. You traded a Steinway for a glow-in-the-dark table. It is a wet bar, Dad Terrence corrected me, annoyed. It is modern. It has a built-in ice maker. Look, we needed the cash, okay? Moving up here cost a lot. The movers, the heating bills, and we had to buy new furniture to update the look. You sold it. Yeah. Some guy came with a truck yesterday. Gave us cash. How much, Terrence? I don't know, like $2,000. It was heavy, Dad. We were lucky he took it. He said he was going to strip it for parts. $2,000. He sold a family heirloom worth more than his annual salary for pocket change. He sold his mother's voice to a scrapper. I felt a coldness spread through my body that had nothing to do with the snow outside. It was the death of hope. I had held on to a sliver of hope that my son was just misguided, that he was just weak and being led astray by a demanding wife. But this was different. This was a fundamental lack of respect. This was a hollowness in his soul where his heart should be. He didn't just sell a piano. He sold me. He sold his mother. He sold his history for a quick buck and a place to mix drinks. You shouldn't be in here, Terrence said, waving his hand dismissively. Go back to the shed. Frank and Betsy will be up soon and we are planning a party for tonight. A big one. We invited all the neighbors from the luxury estates down the road. I need you out of sight. He turned his back on me. He walked to the fridge and took out a bottle of water. He didn't even wait for my response. He assumed I would obey. He assumed I was broken. I looked at his back. I looked at the purple light of the bar reflecting off the window where the piano used to stand. I didn't scream. I didn't grab him by the collar of his stolen robe and shake him. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my burner phone. I walked back to the mudroom. I sat down on the bench where Coretta used to sit to take off her gardening boots. I typed a text message to Rossi. My thumbs moved with precision. Find the piano, Rossi. It was sold yesterday to a scrapper or a pawn shop in the valley. Buy it back. I don't care what it costs. Find it and put it in storage. I hit send. Then I typed a second message. It is time, Rossi. Execute the financial freeze. Kill the credit cards. Lock the trust fund. And contact the bank about the mortgage fraud on the apartment in the city. I want every asset stripped by sundown. I stood up. I put my wet boots back on. I zipped up my coat. I walked back out into the cold. The wind was howling louder now, but I didn't feel it. I had work to do. I had a driveway to finish shoveling. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted the path to be wide and clear. Because when I kicked them out tonight, I wanted them to have a nice smooth walk all the way down to hell. The snow was still falling in heavy sheets when Madison marched out onto the porch wrapped in a white fur coat that probably cost more than the engine in my truck. She looked at me standing by the shovel and snapped her fingers. Winston, bring the truck around front, she commanded. We are going into town. I leaned on the shovel handle and looked at the driveway. It was packed with their luxury vehicles. The Range Rover, the Porsche, the red convertible covered in a tarp. Why, I asked, my voice rough from the cold air. You have 3 cars sitting right there. The Rover has 4-wheel drive. Madison rolled her eyes as if explaining calculus to a toddler. We are going shopping, Winston. Serious shopping. My parents need winter wardrobes and we need supplies for the party tonight. The Rover is for passengers, not for hauling boxes like a delivery van. That is what your ugly truck is for. You are driving. I looked at Terrence, who was coming out the door adjusting a cashmere scarf. He avoided my eyes. He was letting his wife turn his father into a chauffeur. A mule. Fine, I said. I pulled the Chevy around. It rumbled and shook, knocking loose clumps of ice from the wheel wells. Frank and Betsy piled into the back seat complaining about the smell of old oil and sawdust. Madison sat in the front middle and Terrence took the passenger side. I was the driver. The help. The drive down into the village of Aspen Creek was filled with their chatter. They talked about stocks. They talked about people I didn't know. They talked about how the lodge needed a complete overhaul to make it livable. They spoke as if I wasn't there. I was just part of the machinery of the truck. We pulled up to the curb in front of the Gilded Stag, the most exclusive boutique in the valley. It was the kind of place that didn't put price tags in the window because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. You stay with the truck, Winston, Madison ordered, opening her door. When we bring the bags out, you load them in the bed and try not to let them get wet. Cover them with that tarp you keep back there. They swept into the store like a conquering army. Through the large plate glass window, I watched them. It was a spectacle of greed. Betsy went straight for the furs. She pulled coat after coat off the rack, spinning in front of the mirror, preening like a peacock. Frank gravitated toward the glass display cases where the watches sat on velvet pillows. I saw him point at a gold Rolex, holding his wrist out to compare it to the one he was wearing. Madison and Terrence were grabbing armfuls of designer clothing, silk shirts, imported leather boots, cashmere sweaters. They were piling it all on the counter. The sales clerks were buzzing around them, offering champagne, smiling that predatory smile of people working on commission. They smelled money. I stood by the truck, wiping the side mirror with a rag. I watched Terrence pull out his wallet. He moved with the swagger of a man who has never earned the money he spends. He pulled out the card. It was a black card, not just any black card. It was the Centurion card linked to my primary trust account. I had given him a supplementary card 5 years ago for emergencies, for medical bills, for a down payment on a modest house. He was using it to buy a Rolex for a man who called me a bottom feeder. I watched the clerk ring up the total. I couldn't see the numbers on the register, but judging by the mountain of goods and the watches involved, it had to be upwards of $50,000. Terrence handed over the card with a flourish. He didn't even look at the total. He was busy laughing at something Frank said, probably a joke about how easy it is to spend money when you are rich. The clerk swiped the card. I watched Terrence's face. He was smiling, waiting for the receipt to sign, waiting for the validation. Then the smile froze. The clerk frowned. She looked at the machine. She swiped the card again. She typed something into the keypad. Then she looked up at Terrence and shook her head. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I could read the body language perfectly. Declined. Terrence laughed nervously. He gestured for her to try again. He probably said something about a chip error or a magnetic strip problem. The clerk tried a third time. She held the card up to the light. Then she handed it back to him with a sympathetic shrug. The color drained from Terrence's face. It was as if someone had pulled a plug in his heel. He fumbled in his wallet and pulled out another card, his personal Visa. He handed it over. The clerk swiped it. She shook her head again. Declined. Of course it was declined. I had Rossi freeze that one 10 minutes ago along with his checking account. Now the panic was setting in. I saw Madison stop admiring a handbag. She walked over to the counter, her face tight. She whispered something to Terrence. He was sweating now. I could see the sheen of it on his forehead, even from the street. He was tapping frantically on his phone, probably trying to check his banking app. It wouldn't work. Rossi was thorough. Access denied. Frank and Betsy walked over. Frank had the Rolex on his wrist already. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man who was about to be asked to pay for his own lunch. I leaned against the truck, my breath fogging the air. This was the moment. This was the reality check. They were standing in a temple of consumerism with armfuls of offerings, and their god had just abandoned them. Inside the store, the atmosphere had shifted. The clerks were no longer smiling. They were starting to move the merchandise back behind the counter. They were looking at my son, not as a VIP, but as a waste of time. I saw Frank say something sharp to Terrence. He pointed at the card. He threw his hands up in the air. Madison was red-faced. She was yelling at Terrence right there in the middle of the store. She was pointing at the door, pointing at the truck, pointing at me. She grabbed her phone. I felt my burner phone vibrate in my pocket. I didn't answer. I just watched. Terrence was pleading with the manager now. He was probably pulling the "do you know who I am" card. But in a town like this, nobody cares who you are if the credit terminal says no. Finally, they had to walk away. The clerk took the Rolex back from Frank's wrist. I saw Frank hesitate before giving it up. He looked like a child having a toy taken away. Betsy had to take off the fur coat. She smoothed her own coat down with a look of pure humiliation. They walked out of the store empty-handed. The bell on the door chimed a sad little note. They stepped onto the sidewalk. The cold air hit them, but the shame was colder. "What is going on, Terrence?" Frank barked, his voice echoing in the quiet street. "You bring us to the finest shop in the valley and you can't even buy a pair of socks. I thought you said you had unlimited limits. I thought you said you were a partner in the firm." "It is a mistake," Terrence stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "It has to be a mistake. The bank probably flagged it for fraud because we are in a different zip code. I just need to call them." "Fraud?" Frank scoffed. "The only fraud I see is standing right in front of me." "You made me look like an idiot in there, Terrence. I had that watch on my wrist. Do you know how embarrassing that is? Madison hissed at him, her voice like a whip. "Fix it, Terrence. Call them right now. My mother needs those boots. Her feet are freezing." She turned her glare toward me. "Why are you just standing there cleaning the mirror, Winston? Do something." I looked at her calmly. "I am the driver, Madison. I don't handle the finances. Remember, I am a bottom feeder." She made a noise of pure frustration. "Just get in the truck." Terrence was on his phone dialing the priority number on the back of the black card. I knew exactly what he was hearing. An automated message telling him to contact the fraud department during business hours. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Dad," he whispered so the others wouldn't hear. "Do you have any cash? Just to buy something small, to save face." I looked at my son. He was begging me for a lifeline. A few hours ago, he wouldn't even let me in the front door. Now he wanted me to bail him out of a humiliation he created. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my burner phone while pretending to look for a rag. I sent a quick text code to the bank authorization system. A code only I knew. It didn't unlock the card fully. It set a hard limit, $500. I put the phone away. "Try it one more time, Terrence," I said softly. "Sometimes the chips get cold in this weather. Rub it on your sleeve." Terrence looked at me confused but desperate. He rubbed the black card on his coat. He looked at Madison. "Let me try one more time," he said. "Just for the small things." "Maybe the system was just overloaded," Frank snorted. "Yeah, right. Go ahead. Make a fool of yourself twice." Terrence ran back into the store. I saw him grab a single silk scarf from the rack. Not the coats, not the watch, just a scarf. He went to the counter. He handed the card over with a trembling hand. The clerk sighed and swiped it. This time she paused. She waited. And then she nodded. She printed a receipt. Terrence let out a whoop of joy. He grabbed the bag and ran back out. "It worked," he shouted, waving the bag. "See, Frank? It was just a glitch. The system was down for big transactions, but it is coming back online." Frank looked at the small bag. "You bought a scarf," he said flatly. "I wanted a $20,000 watch and you bought a scarf." "It is starting to work," Terrence insisted. "By tonight it will be fully cleared. I promise. We can come back tomorrow." Frank shook his head and climbed into the back of the truck. "You better hope so, kid. Because if we are going to be stuck in that cabin for 2 weeks, I expect better wine than what I had last night." Madison snatched the scarf from Terrence. "Is this for me?" Terrence nodded. "Of course, baby." "It is the wrong color," she snapped. "I wanted the blue one. This is beige. You know I hate beige." She threw the bag into the dirty bed of the truck. "Get us home, Winston," she commanded. "This trip is a disaster, and drive faster this time." I am cold. I climbed into the driver's seat. I started the engine. I looked in the rearview mirror at their miserable faces. They were angry. They were confused, but they were still arrogant. They thought it was a glitch. They thought the money was still theirs, just temporarily out of reach. They didn't know that the $500 was the last drop of water they would ever get from my well. It was a taunt, a final little game before the end. I put the truck in gear and drove them up the mountain. The silence in the cab was thick with tension. Every bump in the road made Frank curse. Every gust of wind made Madison sigh. I smiled internally. They were worried about a scarf and a watch. They had no idea that by tomorrow night they wouldn't even have a roof over their heads. The party was coming, and I was going to be the best waiter they had ever seen. I would serve them their destruction on a silver platter, and I wouldn't spill a drop. The silence in the truck cab on the drive back up the mountain was thick enough to choke on. My son sat in the passenger seat tapping furiously on his phone, pretending to be in a high-stakes conversation with international bankers. It was all theater. I knew exactly who he was texting. No one. He was just moving his thumbs to look busy, to look important, to hide the fact that he had just been humiliated over a $500 scarf. "It is just a security freeze," Terrence announced loudly, his voice cracking slightly. The bank algorithm flagged the location. Aspen Creek is a high-risk zone for fraud because of all the tourists. I just got a confirmation email. The hold will be lifted by tomorrow morning. Unlimited access restored. Frank grunted from the back seat. "You better be right, kid. I don't like feeling poor. It gives me a rash." Madison reapplied her lipstick in the visor mirror. "Well, if the money is back tomorrow, we need to make up for today. We need to do something big to establish ourselves here. We can't just be the people who bought the Callaway Lodge. We need to be the people who run Blackwood Ridge." She turned to Terrence, her eyes gleaming with a manic energy. "We are going to throw a party." Tomorrow night. A party, Terrence asked, looking relieved to be off the hook about the money. Yes, Madison insisted. A housewarming. We will invite the neighbors, the Vanderbilts down the road, the CEO of that tech company who built the glass fortress on the peak, everyone who matters. We will hire a catering staff, we will get the best wine, we will show them that the Callaway name means something again. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The Callaway name did mean something. It meant integrity. It meant hard work. It didn't mean bouncing checks and serving champagne on credit. We will use the outdoor patio, Madison continued. We will have heaters, fire pits. It will be rustic chic. And Winston. She looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. You are going to help. You are going to be the grill master. You will stay outside by the barbecue. You will cook. You will serve. And you will not speak to a single guest unless they ask for a burger. Do you understand? I understand, I said, my voice flat. Good, she said. And try to find something to wear that doesn't smell like gasoline. We want to look charitable for letting you stay, not desperate. We arrived back at the lodge. I parked the truck around the back by the shed. They piled out, leaving the doors open, leaving their trash on the floorboards, expecting the help to clean it up. I watched them march into the house already on their phones, calling catering companies, ordering cases of liquor they couldn't pay for. They were digging their own graves with golden shovels. They were inviting the entire town to witness their ascent, not realizing they were setting the stage for their own public execution. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Let them have their party. Let them gather an audience. The bigger the crowd, the harder the fall. I went into the shed and sat on the cold cot. I pulled out my tablet. I had installed the security system in the lodge myself 5 years ago. It wasn't just alarms on the doors. It was high-definition cameras in every common room and high-sensitivity microphones meant to detect glass breaking or intruders. My son and his wife thought the little black domes on the ceiling were smoke detectors. They had no idea I was sitting 50 feet away watching them in 4K resolution. I tapped the screen, and the feed from the living room flickered to life. They were celebrating. Terrence had opened a bottle of whiskey, one of the few I had left in the cabinet. He poured generous shots for Frank and Betsy. Madison was pacing the room, sketching layouts in the air with her hands. This is going to be perfect, Madison said. Once we solidify our social standing, the investment offers will pour in. Frank can introduce us to his partners. We can leverage the equity in this place to fund the lifestyle we deserve. Terrence took a large gulp of whiskey. He looked nervous. Maddie, about the equity. We still have the issue of the title. Madison stopped pacing. She turned to him, her face hardening. It is not an issue, Terrence. It is a formality. It is my father, Terrence mumbled. He is still technically the owner. The lease gives us rights, but not ownership. We can't borrow against it until he signs it over. Then we make him sign it. Madison said, her voice dropping to a low hiss. I turned up the volume on the tablet. The audio was crisp. I could hear the ice clinking in their glasses. He is stubborn, Maddie, Terrence said. He thinks he is going to live forever. He thinks he is going to retire here. He is a burden, Madison spat. Look at him, Terrence. He is old. He is useless. He sleeps in a shed. He drives a truck that belongs in a junkyard. He is embarrassing us. And frankly, he is a liability. What if he gets hurt? What if he falls? We would be stuck taking care of him for 20 years. I am not changing diapers, Terrence. I signed up for a partnership, not a nursing service. I watched my son. I watched his face. I waited for the anger. I waited for him to defend the man who taught him how to ride a bike, who paid for his braces, who sat up with him when he had the flu. Instead, Terrence nodded. You are right. He is slowing down. He seemed confused today at the store. Maybe his mind is going. His mind is definitely going. Madison agreed, seizing on the excuse. That is our angle. Tomorrow night during the party we will get him to drink. We will be nice to him. We will toast him. We will make him feel special. And when he is pliable, when he is tired and a little drunk, we will present the papers. What papers? Frank asked from the sofa, looking interested for the first time. Power of attorney, Madison said, and a full transfer of deed. We will tell him it is for insurance purposes. Or taxes. He won't read it. He trusts Terrence. Once he signs, we have total control. And then what Betsy asked, picking lint off her sweater. He is still physically here. Not for long, Madison smiled a smile that made my blood freeze in my veins. Once we have the power of attorney, we can make decisions for his own good. There is a state facility down in the valley. It is state-funded, so it won't cost us a dime. We can have him admitted for observation. Once he is in the system, it is very hard to get out. He will have a bed, he will have meals, and we will have the lodge. Terrence looked down at his glass. A state home, Maddie. Those places are grim. It is better than a shed, Madison countered. And it solves our problem. We need this asset, Terrence. We need the liquidity. Do you want to be poor forever? Do you want to lose me? No, Terrence said quickly. No, of course not. Then we do it, Madison said, raising her glass. To the future. To the Callaway legacy. They clinked glasses. I sat in the dark shed staring at the screen. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was shaking from the sheer force of the betrayal. They weren't just greedy. They were predators. They were planning to strip me of my dignity, my freedom, and my home. They were going to lock me away in a state facility to rot just so they could buy more watches and scarves. My son agreed to it. That was the knife in my back. He didn't fight for me. He sold me out for a woman who despised him almost as much as she despised me. I closed the tablet. I didn't need to hear anymore. I had the recording. It was saved to the cloud. It was evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. It was enough to put them in jail. But jail was too easy. Jail was a safety net. They would have a bed and meals in jail too. I wanted them to feel the cold. I wanted them to feel the absolute terror of having nothing. I stood up. I needed to move. I needed to act. I saw movement on the security feed again. I looked down. Frank had stood up. He was leaving the living room. He wasn't going to the bathroom. He was heading down the hallway toward the master suite, toward my private study. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped out of the shed. The snow muffled my footsteps. I moved through the shadows around the back of the house to the window of the study. The blinds were drawn, but there was a gap. I peered inside. Frank was there. He had closed the door. He was standing behind my mahogany desk. He wasn't just looking around. He was opening drawers. He was rifling through papers. He was looking for the safe. I knew exactly what he wanted. He didn't trust Terrence and Madison to pull off the scheme. He wanted to see the deed himself. He wanted to know what the asset was worth before he wasted any more time with these amateurs. I watched him find the panel behind the painting of the hunt. He pulled the painting aside. He saw the wall safe. He tried the handle. Locked. He cursed silently, kicking the desk. He started looking around the room, searching for a combination written down, searching for a key. He was clumsy, greedy. An idea formed in my mind. A way to accelerate their destruction. A way to give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves publicly. I waited until Frank gave up and left the room, heading back to join the others for another drink. I moved quickly. I went to the side door, punched in the code, and slipped inside. I moved like a ghost through the hallway. The floorboards didn't creak under my boots because I knew exactly where to step. I had built this floor. I entered the study. The smell of Frank's cheap cologne hung in the air, tainting the room. I went to the desk. I opened the bottom drawer where I kept my printer paper. I pulled out a file folder from my jacket. I had brought it from the truck. It contained old drafts of contracts, business proposals from years ago. I took a blank legal document. I grabbed a pen. My hand was steady. At the top of the page, I wrote transfer of assets. I filled the page with legal jargon nonsense, really, but it looked official. I listed the lodge. I listed the surrounding acreage. And at the bottom, I drew a signature line. I placed the document in a folder labeled Deed Original. I put the folder in the top drawer of the desk right on top. It was the first thing anyone would see if they looked. It was bait. They wanted a signature. They wanted a transfer. I would give them the illusion of one. I would let them think they had found the golden ticket. I would let them bring it to me at the party. I would let them think they had won. And then in front of everyone they tried to impress, I would show them what real power looks like. I slipped out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar, just enough to be inviting. I made my way back to the mudroom and out into the snow. Back in the shed, I lay down on the cot. The cold was still there, but now it felt like armor. Tomorrow night there would be a party. There would be music, there would be laughter, and there would be an execution. I closed my eyes. "Sleep well, Terrence," I whispered. "Enjoy the bed, because tomorrow you sleep in the snow." I watched the feed on my tablet as Terrence walked into the study. He moved with the jittery energy of a man who knows he is in over his head. Frank had failed to open the safe, but my son knew exactly where I kept the loose papers. He went straight for the top drawer. I held my breath in the freezing shed. This was the moment that would seal his fate. He pulled out the folder I had planted. I saw his eyes scan the label, Deed Original. His hands shook. He opened it. I saw his lips move as he read the title, Transfer of Assets. A look of pure, unadulterated joy broke across his face. It was the look of a man who just won the lottery without buying a ticket. He didn't read the fine print. He didn't notice that the legal jargon was gibberish. He just saw the words he wanted to see. Transfer, Lodge, Callaway. "Maddie," he screamed, running out of the room, clutching the folder to his chest like a holy relic. "Maddie, you have to see this." I switched the camera feed to the living room. Madison was sitting on the sofa looking bored while her mother complained about the lack of spa services in the bathroom. Terrence burst in waving the folder. "He did it." Terrence gasped, out of breath. "The old man actually did it. Look." Madison snatched the folder from his hands. She scanned the document. Her eyes widened. Her boredom vanished, replaced by a predatory hunger. "It is a transfer deed," she whispered. "He had it drawn up. He was going to give it to us." "Why didn't he say anything?" Frank asked, leaning over the back of the sofa to look. "Because he is proud," Terrence said, his voice thick with relief. "He is proud, and he is stubborn. He probably had this prepared weeks ago, but couldn't bring himself to hand it over. He wants to play the martyr. He wants us to beg for it. Or maybe he forgot," Madison said, tapping the paper. "Look, it is dated last month. He probably put it in the desk, and his senile brain just glossed over it. He doesn't even remember he has it." "This is it," Terrence said, laughing. "This is the answer to everything. We don't need to fight him. We don't need to evict him. He already did the work. All we need is a signature on the dotted line." I sat in the dark shed and watched them pass around the fake document. They were touching it reverently. They thought it was their salvation. They had no idea it was the evidence of their intent to commit fraud. They were celebrating their own entrapment. "But how do we get him to sign it?" Betsy asked, always the pragmatist. "If he is being difficult, he might refuse just to spite us." Madison stood up. She walked to the window looking out toward the shed where she thought I was sleeping. Her reflection in the glass was distorted, twisted. "We don't ask him," she said, her voice cold and steady. "We help him. Tomorrow night is the party. He will be tired from working the grill all day. He will be cold, and we will be very, very nice to him." I leaned closer to the tablet, ensuring the audio recording was capturing every syllable. "We will bring him inside after the guests arrive." Madison continued, outlining her plan. "We will tell him he did a good job. We will give him a drink, a strong one. Maybe two. Terrence, you know how he gets when he drinks whiskey. He gets sentimental, he gets sleepy. He has a low tolerance these days," Terrence agreed. "2 fingers of scotch, and he is out like a light." "Exactly," Madison said. "We get him comfortable. We get him a little tipsy. We tell him this is just a document for the insurance, or for the tax assessor to lower the rates. We tell him it helps you, Terrence. He still thinks he is protecting you. We use that." "And if he reads it?" Frank asked. "He won't read it." Madison scoffed. "He doesn't have his reading glasses. I saw them on the dashboard of his truck. Without them, he can't read the fine print. He will just see the signature line. We guide his hand. We tell him where to sign. And once the ink is dry, this place is ours." "And then what?" Betsy asked. "Then we call the state facility in the morning," Madison said. "We tell them he was wandering around the party confused and aggressive. We show them the signed transfer as proof that he was trying to give away his assets in a fit of dementia. They will take him away for observation. By the time he sobers up, he will be in a locked ward and we will have the title." Terrence nodded slowly. "It is for the best. He can't take care of this place anymore. We are doing him a favor, really." "A favor," I whispered to the cold air of the shed. "You are planning to drug your father and trick him into signing away his home, and you call it a favor." I saved the recording. I backed it up to 3 different secure servers. I had them. I had the conspiracy. I had the intent. I had the means. They thought I was a senile old man who forgot his glasses. They didn't know that my vision was 20/20. They didn't know that the man they were planning to drug had spent 30 years navigating boardrooms full of sharks much deadlier than them. They wanted a signature. I would give them a signature, but it wouldn't be on a transfer deed. It would be on their eviction notice. I put the tablet away. The anger that had been burning in my gut settled into something harder, something colder. It was no longer about teaching a lesson. It was about removal. They were a cancer and I was the surgeon. I pulled out my burner phone. It was time to call in the cavalry. I dialed Rossi. He answered on the first ring. Winston, Rossi, I said, my voice calm and deadly. Change of plans. I don't just want the legal team. I want the full package. Sir Rossi asked, his tone sharpening. They are planning to drug me tomorrow night, Rossi. They are planning to coerce a signature and then have me committed to a state facility. There was a silence on the line, a heavy, dangerous silence. That is a felony kidnapping conspiracy, Winston. I can have the state police there in an hour. No police, I said. The police are for after. I want them to feel the ground shake first. Do you remember the investment I made in '89? The one everyone said was foolish. Titan Security, Rossi said immediately. The private military contractor. You own 51% of the controlling stock. Correct, I said. I have never used their assets for personal matters. I always thought it was an abuse of power, but tomorrow night I am making an exception. What do you need, sir? I want the helicopter, I said. The Sikorsky. I want a full tactical extraction team. 6 men, black suits, intimidating. I want them to land on the front lawn right in the middle of their little party. What time? 9 p.m., I said. That is when they plan to make me sign. I want the bird in the air and the lights shining through the windows at 9:00 sharp. And Rossi. Yes, sir. Make sure they know who I am. I am tired of being the gardener. I want them to see the chairman. Understood, Winston. I will coordinate with the Titan operations chief. We will have the airspace cleared. Anything else? Yes, I said, looking at the skis in the corner. Bring the eviction notices and bring a team to secure the perimeter. Once I kick them out, I don't want them stepping 1 foot back on my mountain. Not for a phone charger, not for a toothbrush. When they leave with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Consider it done. I hung up the phone. I laid back on the cot. The cold was biting, but I didn't feel it anymore. I was fueled by the heat of the coming fire. They wanted a show. They wanted to impress the neighbors. They wanted to be the kings of the mountain. Tomorrow night I would give them a show. I would bring the thunder and the lightning. And when the dust settled, they would realize that they were never the kings. They were just the jesters dancing in my court. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in days I slept. I slept the sleep of a man who has already won the war and is just waiting for the enemy to realize they are dead. The night air was razor-sharp against my neck, but the fire from the grill kept my face burning. By 7:00, the driveway of my lodge looked like a showroom for a luxury car dealership. The snow had been packed down by the tires of Mercedes G-Wagons and Bentleys. They parked wherever they wanted, blocking the path, creating a barricade of metal and money that trapped me on my own property. I stood behind the massive stainless steel barbecue station, the one I had custom built for Coretta's 50th birthday party, and flipped steaks for people who wouldn't have spit on me if I was on fire. Madison had insisted I wear a uniform. She had dug it out of a box in the attic, probably left over from a catering company we used a decade ago. It was a white jacket that was 2 sizes too small and smelled faintly of mothballs. The sleeves rode up my forearms, exposing my thermal undershirt. I looked ridiculous. I looked like a clown. And that was exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to look small. She wanted me to look like the help so that when she introduced me to her high society friends, she could point and laugh. The guests spilled out onto the heated patio, their laughter loud and brittle in the mountain air. They were a mix of old money pretenders and new money sharks. I saw women shivering in strapless gowns, refusing to put on coats because it would hide their jewelry. I saw men smoking cigars that cost more than the weekly grocery bill for a family of 4. They treated the patio like a stage, performing for each other, trying to see who could laugh the loudest, who could drink the fastest. I kept my head down, focusing on the meat. The smoke stung my eyes. Grease popped and sizzled on the grates. I was invisible to them. I was just a pair of hands preparing their food. They walked right past me, bumping into my shoulder without saying, "Excuse me." They treated me like a fixture, like the stone pillars holding up the roof. Then I saw him, a man separated from the pack near the fire pit, holding a tumbler of scotch. He turned, and the light from the flames illuminated his face. I froze. I knew him. It was Arthur Pendleton. 10 years ago, he had sat across a boardroom table from me, sweating through his expensive suit while I dismantled his attempt to hostilely take over one of my commercial plazas. I had crushed him legally and financially. He had begged me for a graceful exit. I had given him one because I am not a monster, but he knew exactly who I was. Or at least he knew who Winston Calloway the tycoon was. He didn't seem to recognize the old man in the tight jacket covered in grease stains. He walked over to the grill, peering at the steaks with a critical eye. He looked older, heavier, but the arrogance was still there, etched into the lines around his mouth. He pointed a thick finger at a ribeye. "That one is overcooked," he barked. "I asked for medium rare. That looks like shoe leather." I looked at the steak. It was perfectly pink in the center. I looked at Arthur. He was squinting at me, trying to place my face, but the context was all wrong. He expected Winston Calloway to be in a bespoke suit in a high-rise office, not flipping burgers on a snowy mountain. To him, I was just a face he might have seen on a bus. "It is medium rare, sir," I said, keeping my voice low and gravelly, altering my cadence. "The lighting out here is deceptive." "Don't talk back to me," Arthur snapped. "I know what I see. You ruined the cut. Who hired you anyway? This service is amateur hour." Before I could respond, Frank appeared. He had a glass of wine in one hand and a cigar in the other. He draped an arm around Arthur's shoulder, laughing that loud, boisterous laugh of a man who is spending someone else's money. "Arthur," my friend Frank boomed, "is the help giving you trouble? This guy is incompetent," Arthur complained, gesturing at me with his glass. "He is burning the meat, Frank. Where did you find him?" Frank laughed again, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "Oh, him. Don't mind him, Arthur. He is just some local we picked up cheap. He lives in the valley. We let him sleep in the shed in exchange for doing the heavy lifting. You know how it is. Good help is hard to find these days, so you settle for warm bodies." He winked at Arthur as if they were sharing a private joke. A joke at my expense. I gripped the metal tongs in my hand. I squeezed them so hard the metal flexed. I imagined reaching across the grill and grabbing Frank by his silk tie. I imagined dragging his face down to the hot grates just for a second, just to show him what heat really felt like. I looked at Frank. He was wearing my watch. Not the Rolex he tried to buy yesterday, but an old Patek Philippe I kept in my dresser drawer. He must have raided the bedroom while I was outside. It was a watch Coretta gave me on our wedding day. Seeing it on his wrist, seeing it slide up and down his arm as he gestured dismissively at me, took every ounce of my self-control to not end the night right there. I took a deep breath. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. Let them stack the deck. Let them think they hold all the cards. "I am sorry, sir," I muttered, forcing my head down, playing the part. "I will put a fresh one on for you." "Good," Arthur huffed. "And try not to ruin this one." They walked away laughing, leaving me alone in the smoke. I watched them go. I watched them mingle with the other guests, spreading their poison. They were talking about me. I could see them pointing back at the grill, shaking their heads. They were building their narrative. The incompetent servant. The charity case. I flipped the steak. The fire flared up, licking at my hands. I didn't pull back. I needed the pain. I needed to stay sharp. 20 minutes later, the side door opened again. This time it wasn't a guest. It was Terrence. My son looked pale. He was sweating despite the freezing temperature. He held 2 crystal glasses in his hands. He looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone was watching him. He navigated through the crowd, smiling weakly at people he didn't know, dodging conversations. He made a beeline for the grill. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice tight. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the food. "What do you want, Terrence? Do you need more burgers? Or maybe you want me to clean your shoes while I am down here?" "Dad, don't be like that," Terrence whispered, leaning in close. "Look, I know this is hard. I know Madison can be demanding. But tonight is important. Important for who I asked, flipping a burger onto a platter. For all of us," Terrence said. "Look, I brought you something." He held out one of the glasses. It was filled with amber liquid. No ice. "It is the good stuff, Dad. Macallan 25. I found it in the cabinet. I thought you might want a drink. To warm up. It is freezing out here." I looked at the glass. The liquid swirled enticingly. It looked innocent. It looked like a peace offering. But I knew better. I had heard the conversation. I had the recording. "You never bring me a drink, Terrence," I said, looking him in the eye. "You usually tell me not to drink because it looks bad. Why now?" Terrence licked his lips. A nervous tic he had since he was a child. "I just feel bad, Dad. You are working hard. I wanted to do something nice. Drink it. Please. It will help you relax." Help me relax. That was the code. Help me pass out. Help me become pliable. I took the glass. It was heavy in my hand. Terrence watched me intently, his eyes locked on the rim of the glass. He was holding his breath. He needed me to drink it. The entire plan depended on it. Thanks, son, I said. Cheers, Terrence said, raising his own glass, though I noticed he barely took a sip of his. I brought the glass to my lips. I smelled the oak and the peat of the scotch. But underneath that familiar aroma there was something else, a faint chemical sweetness. They had crushed pills into it, probably sleeping pills or anti-anxiety meds they found in the medicine cabinet. I let the liquid touch my lips, but I didn't swallow. I pulled the glass away and sighed as if savoring the taste. Good stuff, I said. Yeah, Terrence exhaled, his shoulders dropping. The best. Listen, Dad, after you finish that, come inside for a minute, okay? Just for a second. There is something I need you to look at. Just some paperwork for the property tax. It will save us some money. I figured since you are here, we could just get it signed and out of the way. There it was. The hook. Sure, I said. Let me just finish up here. Okay, Terrence said, backing away. Finish the drink, Dad. It will warm your blood. I will see you inside in 10 minutes. He turned and walked back toward the house, melting into the crowd. He looked relieved. He thought the hard part was over. He thought the old man had taken the bait. I watched him go. I waited until his back was turned, until the crowd of laughing strangers blocked his view. I turned to the large stone planter next to the grill. It held a decorative evergreen bush. I tipped the glass. The expensive scotch, the poison, the betrayal poured out into the soil. It vanished instantly into the dark earth. I shook the last drops from the glass. I looked at the empty crystal. It warms the blood, he had said. I set the glass down on the side table of the grill. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. I checked my watch. 8:50 p.m., 10 minutes. I looked up at the night sky. It was pitch black, cloudy, and heavy with more snow. But somewhere up there above the clouds, the rotors were already turning. The team was airborne. I took off the ridiculous white chef's hat Madison had forced me to wear. I tossed it onto the grill. It caught fire instantly, curling into black ash. I straightened my jacket. I brushed the soot from my sleeves. 10 minutes, Terrence, I whispered. I picked up the empty glass again, holding it like a prop. I needed to look the part. I needed to look like the tipsy, tired old man they expected. I walked toward the patio doors. I moved with a slight stumble, exaggerating my age, exaggerating the fatigue. I wanted them to see weakness. I wanted them to feel confident, because confidence makes people sloppy. And when they handed me that pen, when they put that fraudulent document in front of me, they were going to be so sure of their victory that they wouldn't hear the thunder coming until it was right on top of them. I opened the door and stepped into the warmth of the party. The noise hit me. The smell of expensive perfume and deceit. I saw Madison across the room. She spotted me. Her eyes went to the empty glass in my hand. She smiled. A shark sensing blood in the water. She nudged Terrence. The trap was set, but they didn't know who was really caught in it. I stepped into the great room, still holding the empty crystal glass like a prop in a bad play. The heat of the room was stifling after the freezing patio. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted meat, but underneath it all was the stench of desperation. The guests were clustered in tight circles, holding their drinks like shields, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny. I navigated through them, moving with the exaggerated shuffle of the tired old man they expected me to be. Betsy Miller was holding court near the fireplace, standing dangerously close to the new white shag rug Madison had bought to replace my Persian runner. She was swaying slightly, her face flushed from the open bar. She held a glass of my best Cabernet in one hand and was gesturing wildly with the other, telling a story about a yacht she had never owned. I was at least 6 feet away from her, heading toward the kitchen to put down the glass when it happened. Betsy spun around to emphasize a point, and her hip checked the corner of the heavy oak side table. She stumbled. The wine glass flew from her hand. It seemed to hang in the air for a second, a spinning red jewel, before gravity took hold. It hit the floor right next to her white satin pumps. The glass shattered. Dark red wine exploded outward, soaking the hem of her cream-colored pants and splashing all over her shoes. The room went silent. The music seemed to stop. Betsy stared down at her ruined shoes, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She looked around, searching for someone to blame, because women like Betsy never accept that they are clumsy drunks. Her eyes landed on me. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. You clumsy old fool. Look what you did. You bumped into me. I stood there frozen. I was 6 feet away. I hadn't moved. The guests near us saw it. They saw me standing there motionless, but no one said a word. They watched the spectacle, waiting to see who would be the sacrifice. I didn't touch you, Betsy, I said calmly, my voice low. You hit the table. Don't you lie to me, she screamed, her voice rising to a pitch that made the crystal chandelier vibrate. You were sneaking up behind me. You startled me. This is vintage satin. These shoes cost more than your life. You ruined them. The crowd parted as Madison cut through them like a shark fin through water. She saw the wine on the rug. She saw her mother's stained shoes. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look for the truth. She looked at me and she saw a target. What did you do? She hissed, stopping inches from my face. He threw wine on me. Madison, Betsy wailed, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy conviction. He stumbled around drunk and spilled it all over me. Look at my shoes. Madison turned on me, her eyes burning with a cold fury. I told you to stay outside. I told you not to embarrass us, and you come in here smelling like smoke and ruin my mother's clothes. I didn't do it, Madison, I said, holding my ground. Ask anyone here. Ask your husband. I looked at Terrence. He was standing by the bar holding the fake deed I had planted. He saw the whole thing. He saw his mother-in-law trip. He knew the truth. Terrence, I said. Tell her. Terrence looked at me. Then he looked at Madison. He saw the rage in her eyes. He saw the way the guests were watching, judging, waiting to see if he had control over his household. He took a sip of his drink and looked away. I didn't see anything, Dad, he muttered. You know you get clumsy when you are tired. The betrayal hit me harder than a physical blow. My son, the boy I taught to fish, the man I put through college, just threw me to the wolves to save his own skin. Madison smiled. It was a terrifying, triumphant smile. She pointed at the floor. Clean it up, she commanded. I looked at the puddle of wine soaking into the white rug. I looked at Betsy's stained shoes. Excuse me, I asked. You heard me? Madison said, her voice loud enough for the back of the room to hear. Get on your knees, Winston. Clean up the wine, and then clean my mother's shoes. Use your sleeve if you have to. I don't care. Just get it off before it sets. The room was deathly quiet now. 50 of the town's wealthiest citizens were watching. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight. Others looked amused, sipping their drinks and whispering. They were watching a master class in humiliation. I am not cleaning her shoes, Madison, I said, my voice steady. Madison stepped closer, invading my personal space. She poked a finger into my chest, right on the breastbone. It hurt. You are living in my house, she spat. You are sleeping in my shed. You are eating my food. You are a leech, Winston, a sad old leech, and if you want to stay under this roof tonight, you will do exactly what I tell you. She pointed at the floor again. Kneel, she ordered. Kneel down and clean it up, or so help me God, I will throw you out into the snow right now. No coat, no wallet, no truck. You will walk down that mountain in the dark, and I hope the wolves find you before the frostbite does. I looked around the room. I looked at the faces of these people, the people Terrence wanted to impress. They weren't disgusted by her cruelty. They were captivated by it. They respected power, and in this room, Madison held the whip. I looked at Terrence one last time. He was studying the label on a wine bottle, refusing to meet my gaze. He was letting this happen. He was letting his wife force his father to his knees in front of strangers. Kneel! Madison screamed, her face twisting into a mask of ugly entitlement. Kneel, you useless old man! I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't a bone. It wasn't my spirit. It was the chain, the heavy chain of fatherhood, of protection, of patience that I had been carrying for 35 years. It broke. It shattered into dust. The old man, the gardener, the bottom feeder vanished. I slowly set the empty crystal glass down on the side table next to the painting of the hunt. I did it with precision, placing it exactly in the center of a coaster. Then I straightened my back. I rolled my shoulders back, releasing the tension I had been holding in my spine. I stood to my full height of 6'2". I lifted my chin. My eyes, which had been dull and watery for the performance, cleared instantly. They became the eyes that had stared down union bosses and hostile takeover artists. They became the eyes of Winston Calloway. The change was subtle, but the effect was immediate. The air around me seemed to shift. I wasn't just standing up. I was rising. Madison took a half step back. Her instinct warned her before her brain caught up. She saw the change. She saw the weakness evaporate, leaving only steel. I brushed a speck of ash from the sleeve of my tight waiter's jacket. I looked at Betsy, who was still waiting for me to clean her shoe. I looked at her with such cold indifference that she actually stopped wailing. Then I turned my gaze to Madison. I locked eyes with her. I didn't blink. I didn't shout. I spoke with a voice that was deep resonant and terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a man who owns the mountain. "Who did you just order?" I asked. The question hung in the air. It wasn't a question, really. It was a challenge. It was a thunderclap before the storm. Madison blinked, confused by the sudden shift in power dynamics. "I ordered you," she stammered, her voice losing its edge. "I told you to kneel." I took a step toward her. She flinched. "You ordered a servant," I said, walking forward until I was towering over her. "You ordered a leech. You ordered a bottom feeder." I looked around the room, making eye contact with Arthur Pendleton, who was standing with his mouth open. I looked at Frank, whose face was starting to pale. "But I am none of those things, Madison." I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a rag. I didn't pull out the fake deed. I pulled out my phone. The screen was glowing. It showed a timer counting down. 0000. Outside, the wind roared. But it wasn't the blizzard. It was a rhythmic, thumping sound. A mechanical heartbeat that shook the windows in their frames. The glass rattled. The wine in the glasses trembled. "What is that sound?" Betsy whispered, looking at the ceiling. "It sounds like a war," Frank muttered. I smiled at Madison. A cold, predatory smile. "That," I said, pointing to the ceiling, "is the sound of your lease expiring." Before she could answer, the front lawn exploded with light. Massive spotlights cut through the darkness, blinding white beams that swept across the windows, turning the night into day. The roar became deafening. I looked at my son, who was finally looking at me. His eyes were wide with terror. He dropped the folder. "You wanted a signature, Terrence," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the helicopter landing on the front lawn. "You wanted the authority." I walked past Madison, bumping her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. I walked to the center of the room. I stood on the white rug right over the wine stain. "You commanded me to kneel," I said to the room at large. I looked at Madison. "But you forgot one thing, little girl." I checked my watch. Kings don't kneel, they reign. The front door burst open. The silence in the room was brittle like thin ice over a deep river, and Madison shattered it with a scream of pure, unadulterated rage. Her face contorted into a mask of ugly entitlement as she lunged at me. Her hand was raised, palm open, fingers hooked like claws aiming for my face. She wanted to slap me. She wanted to physically beat the obedience back into the servant she thought I was. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand to block her. I simply watched her come. I looked into her eyes and saw the fear behind the fury. She knew something had shifted. She knew the ground was moving beneath her feet, but her instinct was to attack, to dominate, to crush. Before her hand could make contact, Terrence threw himself between us. He didn't do it to protect me. He didn't do it because he couldn't bear to see his father struck. He did it because he was terrified of a scene that would ruin his chances of getting the signature. He caught her wrist, mid-swing. "Stop it, Maddie," he hissed, his voice cracking with panic. "Not here. Not now. Look at him. He is drunk. He is confused. Just let me handle it." Madison struggled against his grip, her chest heaving. "Make him kneel, Terrence," she spat. "Make him fix this. I will fix it," Terrence promised. "I will fix everything. Just give me a second." He turned to me. He was sweating profusely now, the perspiration beading on his forehead and running down his neck into the collar of his silk shirt. He looked at the guests who were watching with morbid fascination. He looked at Frank, who was still staring at the wine stain on the rug. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folder, the bait I had planted. "Dad, listen to me," Terrence said, his voice trembling. He shoved the folder toward my chest. "We don't have time for this drama. You are tired. You are making a mistake. Just sign the papers." He clicked a gold pen and tried to press it into my hand. "Sign it, Dad," he pleaded, his eyes darting around the room. "Sign the transfer. It is just for the taxes, remember? It is to protect the asset. Once you sign it, you can go back to the shed. You can sleep. We will forget this ever happened. I will buy Mom a new rug. Just sign the damn paper and go away." I looked at the folder. I looked at the pen. I looked at my son. He was begging me to sign my own death warrant. He was begging me to hand over the last piece of leverage he thought I had so he could discard me like trash. He wasn't asking for help, he was demanding a surrender. I took the folder from his hand. Terrence let out a breath, a sound of relief that was almost a sob. "Thank God," he whispered, just on the line at the bottom. "Dad, you don't need to read it. I already checked it." I opened the folder. I looked at the document. Transfer of assets. The words I had typed myself in the dead of night. The gibberish legal jargon that meant absolutely nothing. I looked up at Terrence. "You checked it?" I asked softly. "Yes, Dad." Terrence lied without blinking. "It is standard stuff. Just sign it." I closed the folder. I held it in both hands. The room was so quiet I could hear the wind howling outside. Everyone was watching. Arthur Pendleton. The neighbors, the social climbers. They were waiting to see the old man capitulate. They were waiting for the transfer of power. I tightened my grip on the folder. The cardstock crinkled. "You want this house?" "Terrence?" I asked, my voice carrying to the back of the room. "Yes, Dad," Terrence said impatiently. "It is our house. You promised." I looked him in the eye. "I never promised you a thing," I said. Then I ripped the folder in half. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. The paper tore with a loud, violent rip. Terrence flinched as if I had hit him. Madison gasped. I put the two halves together and ripped them again, and again, and again. I tore the fake deed into confetti. I tore their dreams into scraps. "What are you doing?" Terrence shrieked, his voice rising an octave. "That was the deed. That was the original. You crazy old man, you just destroyed the title." I threw the pieces in his face. They fluttered down around him like snow, landing on his expensive shoes, landing in his drink. "It wasn't the deed, Terrence," I said, my voice booming, now filling the space. "It was a test, and you failed." I took a step toward him, forcing him back. "You checked it." I mocked him. "You didn't check anything. You didn't read a single word. You just saw what you wanted to see. You saw a shortcut. You saw a payday." I turned to Madison. She was staring at the paper scraps on the floor, her face pale. "My house?" I asked, pointing a finger at the floor. "You think this is your house? Who told you that?" "Terrence told me," she stammered, backing away. "He said you bought it for us. He said it was in the trust." "Terrence lied," I said. I looked at my son. He was shaking his head, backing away until he hit the bar. "Dad, please," he whispered. "Don't do this. Not in front of them." I walked right up to him. I was close enough to smell the fear on him. Close enough to see the dilated pupils of a man whose world is collapsing. "You told them you bought the lodge," I said. "You told them you pay the bills. You told them I was a charity case." I grabbed the lapel of his jacket, the jacket he bought with my stolen money. "Did you tell them about the mortgage fraud, Terrence? Did you tell them about the skimming from the accounts? Did you tell them that you forged my signature on a lease agreement that isn't worth the paper it is printed on?" Terrence tried to pull away, but I held him fast. My grip was iron. I wasn't the frail old man anymore. I was the man who built skyscrapers. "Let go of him," Madison screamed, finding her voice. "Get your hands off my husband, you psycho. Someone call the police." I laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. "Oh, the police are coming, Madison," I promised. "But not for me." Suddenly, the room began to vibrate. It started as a low hum, a vibration in the floorboards that rattled the crystal glasses on the tables. Then it grew. It became a roar, a thumping mechanical rhythm that pounded against the chest. The windows shook in their frames. The chandelier swayed. "What is that?" Frank yelled, looking up. "Is it an earthquake?" The noise grew louder, deafening. It sounded like the sky was tearing open directly above us. Then the light hit. It was blinding. Brilliant white beams cut through the darkness outside, blasting through the large bay windows. The light was so intense it washed out the colors in the room, turning everything into stark, high-contrast silhouettes. The guests screamed. Some dropped to the floor, covering their heads. Others ran toward the hallway, trying to escape the glare. The wind hit the house a second later. The downdraft from the rotors kicked up a cyclone of snow outside, slamming it against the glass. The patio doors, which hadn't been latched properly, blew open with a crash. Freezing air and snow swirled into the room, extinguishing the fireplace and sending napkins flying like white birds. Through the blinding light and the swirling snow, a shape descended. A massive black machine settling onto the front lawn, crushing the pristine snow, crushing the flower beds, crushing the very idea of a quiet evening. It was the Sikorsky S-76 from Titan Security. Matte black, sleek, predatory. The side door of the helicopter slid open before the skids even touched the ground. Men poured out. They weren't police, they weren't sheriff deputies. They were 6 men in tactical gear wearing black suits under armored vests. They moved with the precision of a strike team. They didn't run, they advanced. They marched through the open patio doors, boots crunching on the glass of the broken wine flutes. They ignored the screaming guests. They ignored Frank, who was cowering behind the sofa. They formed a perimeter around the room in seconds, their faces impassive behind dark sunglasses despite the night. The leader of the team stepped forward. He was a mountain of a man with a scar running down his jaw. He wore an earpiece and carried himself with an air of absolute lethal authority. Behind him walked a man in a pristine charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase. He walked through the snow and the chaos as if he were walking into a boardroom. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the mess. He looked only at me. It was Mr. Rossi. The room fell into a stunned, terrified silence. The only sound was the dying whine of the helicopter turbines outside and the wind whistling through the open doors. Rossi walked to the center of the room. He stopped in front of me. He ignored the waiter's uniform. He ignored the grease stains. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of supreme respect. "Good evening, Mr. Calloway," Rossi said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "My apologies for the delay. The weather conditions required a tactical approach." He turned and snapped his fingers. One of the bodyguards stepped forward and handed him a heavy wool overcoat. Rossi shook it out and held it open for me. I slipped my arms into it, covering the shameful white jacket. It was warm. It was heavy. It felt like armor. I buttoned it slowly, watching the faces in the room. Terrence was staring at Rossi with his mouth open. He recognized him. He had met Rossi once years ago when he came to ask for money for a failed startup. "Rossi," Terrence whispered, "what are you doing here?" Rossi didn't answer him. He turned back to me. "The perimeter is secure," Sir Rossi said. "We have blocked the access road. No one leaves without your authorization. The local authorities have been briefed and are holding at the main gate." I nodded. "Good." I looked at Madison. She was trembling, her face a mask of confusion and fear. She looked at the helicopter outside. She looked at the men in black suits. She looked at Rossi. And then she looked at me. "Who are you?" she whispered. "You are a gardener. You are nobody." Rossi stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Madison with the same expression one might look at a cockroach. "Madam," he said coldly, "you are addressing Winston Calloway, founder and chairman of Calloway Holdings, majority shareholder of Titan Security, and the sole legal owner of this mountain and everything on it." He gestured to the room, "including the debt on the luxury vehicles in the driveway, including the mortgage on your parents' house in Connecticut, and including the bank that holds the lien on your husband's failed marketing firm." Rossi opened his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of documents. "I believe," Sir Rossi said, handing me the papers, "that you wanted to address the issue of trespassing." I took the papers. I looked at Terrence. "I am not nobody, Madison," I said, my voice quiet but filling the room. I walked over to the chrome bar. I picked up a bottle of expensive whiskey. I poured a glass. "I am the landlord." I took a sip. "And rent is due." The silence that followed Rossi's declaration was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off but before the screaming starts. Mr. Rossi did not even glance at Terrence, who was standing there with his hand extended as if expecting a handshake from an old friend. Rossi walked past him as though he were a piece of furniture. He walked past Madison, who was frozen in her aggressive stance, her hand still half raised. He walked past Frank, whose face had gone the color of old ash. Rossi stopped directly in front of me. He snapped his heels together with a military precision that echoed on the hardwood floor. He held the heavy wool coat open, his eyes fixed on mine with an expression of deferential loyalty that told every person in that room exactly where the power lay. I slipped my arms into the coat. It covered the grease-stained waiter jacket. It covered the humiliation. It felt heavy and expensive and right. I buttoned it slowly, my eyes never leaving my son's face. Rossi took a step back and bowed slightly. "Good evening, Chairman Calloway. I apologize for the dramatic entrance. The weather made the roads impassable for the limousine, so we had to improvise with the air support. The security team has secured the perimeter. We have local law enforcement on standby at the base of the mountain awaiting your command." Terrence made a choking sound. "Chairman, Rossi, what are you doing? That is my dad. He is retired. He fixes generators. Rossi turned his head slowly. He looked at Terence over the rim of his glasses. His expression was one of mild distaste, as if he had stepped in something unpleasant. Mr. Terence Calloway, I suggest you remain silent. You are currently in a very precarious legal position. Rossi turned back to me, ignoring my son's sputtering. Sir, regarding the individuals currently occupying your residence without authorization, the legal team has prepared the necessary filings for immediate eviction and criminal trespassing charges. However, given the severity of the fraud we uncovered this morning, I thought you might want to handle the disclosure personally. How do you wish to proceed with this refuse? He gestured to Madison and her family with a flick of his hand. I looked at them. They were huddled together near the wet bar. Madison looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped on concrete. Her arrogance was cracking, revealing the terrified child beneath. I want them to see it, Rossi, I said, my voice low and steady. I want them to see exactly who they tried to bury. Frank Miller found his voice then. It was a high-pitched squeak of a voice stripped of all its bluster. Chairman, what is this nonsense? He is a gardener. Look at his hands. He is a maintenance man. I saw him cleaning the gutters. This is a joke, right? Some kind of elaborate prank for the party. He looked around at the guests, laughing nervously. Good one, Terence. You hired actors. Very funny. Now tell this gentleman to move his helicopter off the lawn before it ruins the grass. I looked at Frank. He was desperate to believe the lie, because the truth was too terrifying to contemplate. Rossi looked at me. I nodded. Rossi didn't speak. He simply turned and walked toward the massive 80-inch flat-screen television that Madison had insisted on installing above the fireplace covering the beautiful stonework. It was a smart TV connected to the house network, the network I built, the network I controlled. Rossi pulled a tablet from his briefcase. He tapped the screen once. The television flickered. The ambient screensaver of a roaring fire vanished. In its place, a document appeared. It was high-resolution, crisp, and undeniable. It was the deed to the Blackwood Ridge Lodge. The name on the owner line was highlighted in bright yellow, Winston Jerome Calloway. Beneath it was the date of purchase, 1982. Frank stared at the screen. He squinted, trying to find the loophole, trying to find the mistake. That is just a piece of paper, he stammered. Terence said it was in a trust. He said he had power of attorney. Rossi swiped the tablet. The image on the screen changed. Now it showed a corporate organizational chart. It was a complex web of companies, subsidiaries, and holding firms. At the very bottom were names everyone in the room recognized: real estate firms, tech startups, and a mid-sized investment bank called Sovereign Capital. Lines drew upward from all these companies, connecting them to a single parent entity, Calloway Holdings. And at the top of this pyramid was a single photo. It was a headshot of me taken 5 years ago for a Forbes article I had declined to participate in. I was wearing a tuxedo. I looked powerful. I looked nothing like the man who had just grilled their steaks. Under the photo was the title, Founder and Chairman, Majority Shareholder. The room gasped. I saw Arthur Pendleton, the man who had insulted my cooking, drop his glass. It shattered on the floor, but no one looked down. They were staring at the screen. Frank Miller was shaking his head. No, that is impossible. Sovereign Capital. That is my bank. That is who holds the note on my construction firm. Rossi turned to Frank. A shark smile touched his lips. Correct, Mr. Miller. Sovereign Capital holds the debt for Miller Construction. They also hold the mortgage on your primary residence in Connecticut and the lease on your fleet of company vehicles. Rossi swiped the tablet again. A spreadsheet appeared. It was a list of delinquent payments, a list of final notices. Mr. Miller, Rossi said, his voice projecting to the back of the room. You are currently 90 days past due on your commercial loans. Your credit lines were frozen this morning by order of the Risk Management Department of Calloway Holdings. Effectively, sir, you are bankrupt, and the man you just ordered to clean your wife's shoes is the man who owns your debt. Frank's knees gave out. He didn't fall, but he sagged, grabbing the back of a chair to hold himself up. He looked at me with eyes wide with horror. He realized in that second that he hadn't just insulted a waiter. He had insulted the man who held the deed to his entire life. Betsy let out a whimper. We are ruined, she whispered. I stepped forward. I walked up the 2 small steps to the raised hearth of the fireplace. I stood beneath the screen that displayed my empire. I looked out at the sea of stunned faces. I reached up and brushed the soot from the lapel of the heavy wool coat. I wiped the grease from my hands with a silk handkerchief Rossi handed me. I looked at Madison. She was shaking. She was looking at the screen and then at me, trying to reconcile the two realities. "You called me a bottom feeder," I said, my voice echoing in the silence. "You said I was dragging you down to the gutter." I gestured to the screen. "I am the gutter, Madison. I am the foundation. I am the concrete and the steel that holds this entire mountain up." I took a step down from the hearth, walking toward them. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. No one wanted to be close to the blast zone. "I gave you a chance," I said, looking at Terrence. "I gave all of you a chance." I stopped in front of my son. He looked small. He looked like a child wearing his father's clothes. "I came here to remember your mother," I said softly. "I came here to find peace. I found you living in my house. I found you drinking my wine. I found you throwing your mother's art into a damp shed to make room for your toys." Terrence tried to speak, but no words came out. "I could have thrown you out the first night," I continued. "I could have called the sheriff when I saw the digital lock, but I didn't. I wanted to see. I wanted to see who you had become. I looked at Madison. I played your game. I slept in the shed. I shoveled your snow. I let you treat me like a dog because I wanted to know if there was any humanity left in you. I wanted to know if there was a single spark of decency beneath the designer clothes and the arrogance." I shook my head. "There wasn't. You took my kindness and you called it weakness. You took my silence and you called it stupidity." I walked back to the fireplace. I turned to face them all. "I offered you a hand up," I said, my voice rising. "For years I paid your bills. I covered your mistakes. I let you believe you were successful because I wanted you to have confidence. But you didn't use that help to build anything. You used it to buy things to impress people who don't care about you." I pointed at the guests. "Look at them, Terrence. Look at your friends. Are they helping you now? Are they standing by you?" Terrence looked around. The guests were looking away. Some were checking their phones. Others were edging toward the door. "You had a choice," I said. "You could have treated me with respect, not because I am rich, but because I am your father, because I am a human being." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "But you chose to be parasites. You chose to feed off the host until you thought it was dry, and then you planned to discard the husk." I looked at Rossi. "Show them the rest." Rossi nodded. He tapped the tablet one more time. The screen went black for a second. Then a new window opened. It wasn't a document. It was an audio waveform, a recording, and the date on the file was yesterday. Terrence looked at the waveform on the screen and his legs finally gave out. He didn't just stumble, he collapsed. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, his knees cracking against the hardwood right on the edge of the wine-stained rug. He reached out and grabbed the hem of my heavy wool coat. His hands were shaking so violently that he couldn't get a grip on the fabric. He looked up at me and his face was a mask of sheer terror. The arrogance was gone. The pride was gone. All that was left was a scared little boy who realized he had just set fire to his own life. "Dad, please," he sobbed, his voice wet and pathetic. "You have to understand. It wasn't me. I didn't want to do any of this. I didn't want to hurt you. It was her." He pointed a trembling finger at Madison. She was standing a few feet away, frozen in shock, but at his accusation her eyes widened in betrayal. "She made me do it!" "Dad," Terrence cried, the tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat. "She pushed me. Pushed. She said we needed the money. She said you were holding us back. I told her it was wrong. I told her we should wait. But she wouldn't listen. She threatened to leave me, Dad. She said she would take everything if I didn't help her get the lodge. I was trapped. I was scared. Please, Dad. I am your son. You know me. I am not like this. I am a victim here too." The room watched in disgusted silence. It is one thing to be a thief. It is one thing to be a fraud. But to be a coward who throws his wife under the bus to save his own skin is a special kind of low. Even the social climbers in the room looked away, unable to stomach the sight of his groveling. Madison stared at him, her mouth opening and closing. "You coward," she hissed. "You spineless little worm. You were the one who looked up the deed. You were the one who found the forger. Don't you dare put this all on me." I looked down at my son. I looked at his hands clutching my coat. I remembered holding those hands when they were tiny, when I taught him how to walk. I remembered paying for his first suit. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated. And then I remembered the shed. I remembered the cold. I remembered my wife's paintings rotting in the damp corner. I didn't feel pity. I felt a cold, hard resolve. "You are right, Terrence," I said, my voice flat. "You are my son, which means I raised you better than this. I raised you to take responsibility. I raised you to stand on your own 2 feet." I reached down and peeled his fingers off my coat one by one. He tried to hold on, but he had no strength. "You say she forced you?" I asked. "You say you were a victim?" "Yes, Dad," Terrence blubbered, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "She manipulated me. She is the villain here. I just wanted to make her happy." I looked at Rossi. Rossi looked at the tablet. "Let us see about that," I said. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket. I tapped the screen. The audio file I had queued up wasn't just the conversation from the night before. It was a montage. A greatest hits collection of their betrayal compiled from days of surveillance. I pressed play. The sound boomed through the high-end speakers Madison had installed to impress her friends. The audio was crystal clear. It cut through the room like a knife. The first voice was Terrence. There was no mistaking it. He sounded annoyed, impatient. "I don't know why he is still hanging around Maddie. The old man is like a roach. He just won't die." The crowd gasped. Terrence flinched on the floor, covering his ears with his hands as if he could block out his own words. The recording continued. "Honestly, it would be better if he just froze to death in that shed," Terrence's recorded voice said. "It would save us the legal fees of committing him. If he dies of natural causes, we get the insurance payout faster. He is just taking up space. He had his time. Now it is our turn." I looked at Terrence. He was curled into a ball, sobbing into the rug. "You didn't want to do it?" I asked coldly. "You sound pretty enthusiastic to me." Then Madison's voice cut in. "And what about all that junk in the attic, Terrence? Those ugly paintings? That old record collection? It smells like old people." "Sell it," Terrence's voice replied. "Or burn it. I don't care. Just clear it out. I want a home theater up there. My mother is dead, Maddie. She doesn't need that stuff anymore. And Dad is too senile to notice it is gone. Sell the piano, too. It is just firewood with keys." The guests turned away in genuine horror. These were people who valued possessions, who valued status, but even they understood the sanctity of a mother's memory. Hearing a son talk about burning his mother's art, hearing him call his father a roach, it was too much. The veneer of polite society cracked. "You monster," a woman in a fur coat whispered loud enough to be heard. Arthur Pendleton shook his head and set his drink down on a table. He looked at me, then at Terrence. I could see the respect forming in his eyes. He realized he had been dining with vultures. I paused the recording. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy with judgment. "Terrence," I said, my voice quiet, "you sold your mother's piano for scrap. You threw her art in the dirt. You wished death on me so you could buy a home theater." "I am sorry," Terrence wailed. "I was drunk. I didn't mean it. It was just talk." "It wasn't talk," I said. "It was action. You put me in that shed. You watched me shovel your snow, and you laughed." I stepped over him. I stepped over my son as if he were a puddle of spilled wine. I was done with him. He was broken. He was exposed. There was nothing left to say to him. I turned my attention to the other side of the room. Frank and Betsy Miller were trying to make themselves invisible. They were edging toward the hallway, trying to slip away into the shadows while everyone was focused on Terrence. They looked like rats on a sinking ship looking for a line to crawl across. "Going somewhere?" Frank, I asked. Frank froze. He turned slowly, a fake smile plastered across his sweating face. "Mr. Calloway?" he stammered. "Look, this is clearly a family matter. Very tragic. Very emotional. We don't want to intrude. We will just go pack our bags and get out of your hair. We had no idea Terrence was treating you this way. We are appalled, truly appalled." Betsy nodded vigorously, clutching her handbag tight against her chest. "Yes, appalled. We thought you were the help because Terrence lied to us. If we had known, we never would have allowed this. We are respectable people." "Respectable," I repeated, savoring the word. I looked at Rossi. Rossi tapped the tablet again. The screen changed. It was no longer the organizational chart. It was a video feed, a black and white night vision recording. The timestamp was from 40 minutes ago while I was outside grilling steaks. The video showed the interior of my master bedroom, the room Madison and Terrence had claimed. But Terrence wasn't in the video. Frank and Betsy were. The guests watched the screen mesmerized. In the video, Frank was standing by my dresser. He was using a letter opener to pry the lock on my jewelry box. The box Coretta kept her grandmother's pearls in. Betsy was in the walk-in closet. She was stuffing silk scarves and designer handbags into a large suitcase. The video showed Frank finally popping the lock. He reached in. He pulled out a gold pocket watch. My grandfather's watch. He held it up to the light, checking the hallmark. Then he slipped it into his pocket. Betsy came out of the closet holding a diamond tennis bracelet, Coretta's favorite. She tried it on her wrist, admiring the sparkle. Then she dropped it into her purse. The video looped. Frank stealing the watch, Betsy stealing the bracelet, over and over again. I looked at Frank. He was pale as a sheet. His hand went instinctively to his pocket. Betsy let out a little squeak of terror and hugged her purse tighter. "Respectable people," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. I walked toward them. The crowd parted instantly. No one wanted to be near the thieves. "That watch," I said, pointing at Frank's pocket. "It belonged to a man who worked in a coal mine for 40 years, so his family could eat. He carried it every day. It has coal dust in the hinges that you can't clean out." Frank backed up until he hit the wall. I was just protecting it," he stammered. "I saw it was loose. I didn't want it to get stolen during the party." I held out my hand. "Give it to me." Frank shook. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the gold watch. He dropped it into my palm. His hand was clammy. "And the bracelet," I said, turning to Betsy. She started to cry. "I don't have it." "I don't know what you are talking about." Rossi stepped forward. "Ma'am, we have the video evidence, and we have the local sheriff waiting at the bottom of the access road. Grand larceny is a felony. Possession of stolen goods is a felony. If you walk out that door with that bracelet, you will be arrested before you reach the main highway." Betsy sobbed. She opened her purse. She dug past the stolen silverware she had also apparently taken and pulled out the diamond bracelet. She handed it to Rossi, who took it with a handkerchief. "You are not guests," I said, looking at the Millers. "You are common thieves. You came into my house, you drank my wine, and you robbed me while I cooked your dinner." I turned to the room, addressing everyone. "This is who they are," I said. "This is the family that wanted to be kings of Blackwood Ridge, a fraud, a coward, and 2 thieves." I looked at Rossi. "Are the police ready?" "Yes, sir," Rossi said, checking his watch. "The sheriff is at the gate. He has the warrant for Frank Miller regarding his outstanding business fraud in Connecticut, and he is ready to take statements regarding the theft here tonight." Frank's legs gave out. He slid down the wall, sitting on the floor in a heap of expensive fabric and cheap morality. "Good," I said. I looked at Madison. She was the only one still standing. She was alone in the middle of the room. Her husband was on the floor. Her parents were cornered. Her empire of lies had burned to the ground. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw her clearly. She wasn't an ice queen. She was just a greedy girl who bet everything on a lie and lost. "Get them out of my sight," I said to Rossi. But Sir Rossi said quietly, "The weather. It is a blizzard out there." I walked to the window. The snow was swirling in the helicopter lights. It was a whiteout. I turned back to them. "I know," I said. I looked at Terrence. I looked at Frank. I looked at Madison. "You have legs," I said. "Start walking." "But our cars," Frank wailed. "We can't walk down the mountain. It is 5 miles. Your cars have been impounded," I said. "They were parked illegally on private property. My property. The tow trucks came up the service road an hour ago." "You can't do this," Madison screamed. "It is murder. We will freeze." I walked over to the closet by the front door. I opened it. I pulled out 4 shovels, the same shovels they made me use this morning. I threw them onto the floor in front of them. The metal clanged loudly against the wood. "If the snow is too deep," I said, "shovel your way out." I pointed to the door. "Go, before I have the security team throw you out." I watched them, broken, humiliated, ruined. They picked up their coats. They didn't pick up the shovels. They huddled together, shivering before they even stepped outside. They opened the door. The wind howled. The snow blew in, biting and cold. They stepped out into the night. No luxury cars, no heated seats. Just the long, dark road down the mountain. I watched them disappear into the white. Rossi closed the door. The latch clicked shut. The silence returned to the lodge. But this time it wasn't the silence of an empty house. It was the silence of peace. I turned to the guests who were still standing there, terrified and awestruck. "The party is over," I said. "Please drive carefully." I walked to the fireplace. I threw a log onto the dying embers. The fire roared back to life. I was alone. but for the first time in a long time I wasn't lonely. I was home. The recording ended and the room fell into a silence so deep it felt like the air had been sucked out of the space. Rossi stepped forward again, his shoes clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. He held the tablet against his chest like a shield. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the wreckage of the party. He looked directly at the three people huddled by the wet bar. Mr. Terence Calloway, Rossi began, his voice devoid of any warmth. As of 9 o'clock this evening, the Board of Trustees for the Calloway Family Trust has convened an emergency session. Given the evidence of gross misconduct and criminal intent demonstrated in these recordings, they have voted unanimously to dissolve your beneficiary status. Terence stared at him blankly, his mind unable to process the speed of his destruction. Dissolve, he whispered. What does that mean? It means, Rossi continued, flipping a page on his digital screen, that your access to all family accounts has been terminated permanently. Your black card has been deactivated. Your personal checking accounts, which were linked to the Trust for Overdraft Protection, have been frozen pending a forensic audit. Effectively, sir, you have a balance of 0. Madison let out a sharp gasp. You can't do that. We have bills. We have expenses. Rossi turned his cold gaze to her. Mrs. Calloway, regarding your residence in the city. The penthouse apartment you claim to own. The mortgages held by Sovereign Capital, a subsidiary of Calloway Holdings. Due to the fraudulent financial statements you submitted on your application claiming assets that belong to your father-in-law, the bank has exercised its right to accelerate the loan. Accelerate, she stammered. It means the full balance of $1.2 million is due immediately, Rossi explained calmly. Since your accounts are frozen and your husband is now indigent, the bank has already initiated foreclosure proceedings. The locks on the apartment were changed an hour ago. You are homeless. Madison grabbed the edge of the bar, her knuckles turning white. No. No, that is my apartment. My clothes are there, my jewelry. Your assets inside the property have been seized as collateral against the debt, Rossi said. Then Rossi turned to Frank Miller. The older man was still slumped against the wall, holding his chest, trying to make himself look small. Rossi walked over to him, towering over the cowering man. And Mr. Miller. Rossi said, his voice dropping an octave. We saved the best for last. Miller Construction. A fine company. Or it was until this morning. Frank looked up, sweat beading on his upper lip. What did you do? Calloway Holdings was the primary investor in your latest development project, Rossi said. We held 60% of the equity. Tonight at 8:30 p.m., we exercised the clawback clause in our contract due to the discovery of ethical violations involving the principal. Ethical violations, Frank choked out. I didn't do anything to the company. You stole a watch from the chairman of the board, Rossi said, pointing to the gold pocket watch now in my hand. That is a felony committed by a CEO. It triggers the immediate dissolution of the partnership. We pulled our funding, Frank. All of it. $40 million withdrawn in a single transaction. Frank's face went gray. Without that capital, the loans default. The payroll bounces. Precisely, Rossi said, snapping the tablet cover shut. The banks were notified 10 minutes ago. Your company accounts are locked. Your lines of credit are revoked. You are not just bankrupt, Frank. You are personally liable for the outstanding debt. You will lose your house in Connecticut. You will lose your cars. You will lose your pension. You are finished. The weight of the words hung in the room like lead. In less than 5 minutes, Rossi had stripped them of everything. Their money, their homes, their futures. They were standing in my living room wearing expensive clothes, but they were destitute. Madison looked at Terence. Her eyes were wide, not with love or concern, but with a dawning realization of just how far she had fallen. She looked at the man she had married for his potential inheritance and saw only a liability. You lied to me, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. You told me he was nothing. You told me the money was secure. Terence reached for her. Maddie, please, I didn't know. He never told me. Don't touch me, she screamed. She lunged at him. It wasn't a slap this time. It was a feral attack. She clawed at his face, her fingernails leaving red streaks across his cheek. She grabbed his silk shirt and ripped at buttons popping and bouncing on the floor. You ruined my life, she shrieked, pounding her fists against his chest. I married a loser. I married a fraud. I could have had anyone, Terence. Anyone. And I chose you because you promised me this life. And now look at us. We have nothing. Terence tried to defend himself, holding his hands up to block her blows, but he didn't fight back. He took it. He took the punishment because deep down he knew he deserved it. He had led her off a cliff just as surely as he had tried to lead me. Get off him, I barked. Madison froze. She turned to look at me, her chest heaving, her hair wild. "You," she hissed. "You did this. You sat there and watched us. You let us dig this hole. I handed you the shovel, Madison," I said calmly. "You were the one who kept digging." Suddenly, a groan cut through the tension. Frank Miller clutched his left arm and let out a strangled cry. He slumped sideways, sliding further down the wall until he was lying flat on the floor. His eyes rolled back in his head. His breathing became ragged and loud. "My heart," he gasped, clutching his silk tie. "I can't breathe. Call an ambulance." "I am having a heart attack." Betsy screamed and threw herself over him. "Frank, oh God, Frank, don't die. Help him. Someone help him." The guests murmured nervously. A few stepped forward, their instincts to help kicking in. Even Arthur Pendleton looked concerned, reaching for his phone. "Stop!" I ordered, my voice cracking like a whip. Arthur froze. Everyone looked at me. I walked over to where Frank was lying. I looked down at him. His color was bad, but his breathing was rhythmic. His hand was clutching his chest, but I noticed his other hand was subtly adjusting his jacket to hide the bulge of the silverware he had stolen. "He is faking," I said. "How can you be so cruel?" Betsy wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "He is dying. The stress killed him." "You killed him." Rossi stepped forward. He knelt beside Frank. He didn't check for a pulse. He didn't loosen the tie. He leaned close to Frank's ear. "Mr. Miller," Rossi said softly but clearly enough for the room to hear, "if you are unconscious, we will have to drag you out by your ankles. The medical team on the helicopter is for Callaway personnel only. The nearest public ambulance is 40 minutes away. If you stay on this floor, you will be arrested for trespassing while horizontal. If you stand up, you can walk out with some shred of dignity. The choice is yours." Frank's eyelids fluttered. He let out a long groan. Then miraculously his eyes opened. He looked at Rossi, then at me. He realized the performance wasn't playing to a sympathetic audience. He sat up slowly, rubbing his arm. "It passed," he muttered. "It was just angina. I need my pills." "Get him up," I said to the security team. Two of the men in black suits stepped forward. They didn't offer a hand. They grabbed Frank by the armpits and hauled him to his feet like a sack of flour. He dangled between them, his feet scrabbling for purchase, his dignity left in a puddle on the floor. "Get your hands off me!" Frank shouted, trying to straighten his jacket. "Do you know who I am? You are a bankrupt thief," I said, "and you are leaving my house." I turned to the room. The guests were silent, watching the finale of the drama. "Clear the room," I said to the security team. "Escort the guests to their vehicles. Anyone who isn't family leaves now." The team moved efficiently, herding the guests toward the door. Arthur Pendleton paused as he passed me. He looked at me with a strange expression, a mix of fear and respect. "Winston," he said, nodding slowly. "I didn't know. Now you do." "Arthur," I said. "Drive safe." The room emptied quickly. The sound of engines starting outside filled the air. Within minutes it was just us, me, Rossi, the security team, and the 4 people who had tried to destroy me. They stood in the center of the room, shivering slightly as the cold air continued to blow in through the open door. Terrence was bleeding from his cheek. Madison was disheveled. Frank and Betsy looked like ghosts. "Time to go," I said. Terrence looked at me. "Dad, where are we supposed to go? We don't have anywhere." "That is not my problem," I said. Madison crossed her arms, trying to summon one last shred of defiance. "Fine, we will go to a hotel. Just let me get my coat, my fur is in the closet, and my bags." "We packed everything." I shook my head. "No." "What do you mean, no?" she asked. "I mean you leave with what you are wearing," I said. "But it is freezing," she shrieked. "That coat cost $10,000. "It was bought with my money," I said. "It stays. The bags stay. The clothes you packed stay. Everything you bought with the stolen funds is evidence in a criminal investigation. You don't get to keep the loot, Madison." She looked at her dress. It was a strapless evening gown, thin silk. "I will freeze to death," she whispered. I walked over to the corner where the cleaning supplies were kept. I picked up the old stained work jacket Madison had forced me to wear earlier, the one she said was suitable for a bottom feeder. I tossed it at her. It landed at her feet. "Wear that," I said. "It is warm enough for the help." She stared at the dirty jacket in horror. "And our cars?" Frank demanded. "We can't drive down the mountain in a blizzard. We will slide off the road." "You won't be driving," I said. "What?" Terrence asked. I pulled out my phone. I showed them a photo from the security camera at the main gate. It showed a line of tow trucks hooking up the Range Rover, the Porsche, and the red convertible. "You parked in a fire lane," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "Private property, unauthorized vehicles. I had them towed an hour ago. They are currently in the impound lot down in the valley." Frank's jaw dropped. "You towed our cars. How are we supposed to get down?" I pointed to the open door. Beyond the threshold, the snow was falling steadily, covering the world in white. The wind was howling through the pines. "You walk," I said. "Walk," Betsy screamed. "It is 5 miles to the main road. It is a blizzard. It is a nice night for a hike," I said, echoing the words Damien had used just days before. "The air is crisp. The views are spectacular." Dad Terrence pleaded, stepping forward, his hands out. "You can't do this. This is a death sentence. We aren't dressed for this. We will get hypothermia. Please, just let us stay in the shed, just for tonight. I will sleep on the floor." I looked at him. I looked at the son who had told his wife I should freeze to death in that very shed to save on legal fees. "The shed is locked," I said, "and I lost the key." I signaled to the head of the security team. "Remove them," I ordered. The guards stepped forward. They were large, imposing men who followed orders without question. They grabbed Terrence and Frank. They grabbed Madison and Betsy. There was screaming. There was struggling. Madison tried to grab onto the doorframe, her fingernails scratching the wood. Frank cursed and kicked. Terrence just wept. They were dragged out onto the porch. The wind hit them instantly, biting and cruel. They huddled together, shivering violently, their expensive clothes offering no protection against the elements. I walked to the doorway. I stood there in my warm wool coat, flanked by Rossi. "Start walking," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "And don't stop until you see the highway lights. If you stop, you freeze. Consider it motivation." Dad Terrence screamed from the bottom of the stairs. "Dad, please." "I am sorry." I reached for the door handle. "Goodbye, son," I said. I slammed the heavy oak door shut. I threw the deadbolt. The digital lock chirped, locking them out forever. I turned back to the empty room. It was quiet. The fire was crackling. "It is done," Rossi said softly. "Yes," I said. "It is done." I watched from the large bay window as the 4 figures disappeared into the white void of the blizzard. The security lights cast long shadows that stretched out before them like grasping fingers. They were not walking as a group. They were struggling individually, fighting the wind and fighting each other. Even through the double-paned glass and the howling gale, I could see the disintegration of their alliance. Madison was the first to fall. She slipped on a patch of ice hidden beneath the fresh powder. Her high heels were useless weapons against the mountain. She went down hard, tumbling into a snowbank. I saw Terrence stop. For a second, I thought he would help her. I thought some instinct of husbandry would kick in. But he didn't. He just stood there, shivering, his arms wrapped around himself, staring down at her. "Get up," I imagined him screaming. "Get up, you are slowing us down." Frank and Betsy didn't even look back. They were trudging ahead, heads down against the wind, clutching their coats tight. The gold watch was gone. The diamond bracelet was gone. All they had left was their bitterness and the freezing cold reality of their bankruptcy. I saw Madison scramble to her feet. She was wearing the dirty work jacket I had thrown at her. It was too big and smelled of oil, but right now it was the most valuable thing she owned. She lunged at Terrence. I saw her push him. She was blaming him even now. She was screaming into the wind, pouring all her venom into the man who had failed to deliver her the kingdom she felt she was owed. They were a mile from the main road, 5 miles from the nearest town. They would make it. Titan Security was monitoring them via thermal drone to ensure they didn't actually die of exposure, because I am not a murderer. But they would suffer. Every step would be a reminder of what they threw away. Every gust of wind would be a slap in the face from the universe. I watched until the darkness swallowed them completely. The red tail lights of the tow trucks were long gone. The helicopter had lifted off, banking away into the night sky, its job done. The silence that settled over the mountain was heavy and profound. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of justice. I turned away from the window. The lodge was a mess. There were broken glasses on the floor. There was wine on the rug. There was the smell of strangers. But beneath it all, the house was breathing again. The parasites were gone. The infection had been cut out. I picked up the poker and stirred the fire. Sparks flew up the chimney, joining the snow in the sky. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. But it was a good tired, the kind of tired you feel after a long day of honest work. After you have finally cleared the weeds from your garden. 30 days later, I sat in my car parked across the street from the Sparkle Shine car wash in the valley. It was a gray Tuesday morning. The slush on the roads was brown and dirty. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to verify. Rossi had sent me the reports, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know that the lesson had landed. I saw him. Terrence. He was wearing a neon green jumpsuit that was stained with soap and grease. He was holding a high-pressure sprayer hosing down the mud from the wheel well of a minivan. His hands were red and chapped from the cold water and the harsh chemicals. He looked thinner. His face was gaunt. The softness of his easy life burned away by the friction of survival. A manager walked out, a clipboard in his hand. He pointed at a spot Terrence had missed. He shouted something. Terrence didn't argue. He didn't puff out his chest or talk about his father's money. He nodded. He bent down. He scrubbed. I watched him for 10 minutes. He worked hard, harder than I had ever seen him work in his life. He was earning $12 an hour. It wasn't enough to pay his debts, but it was enough to buy a sandwich. It was honest money. I rolled up my window. I didn't get out. I didn't wave. He didn't need me to save him. He needed this. He needed to know that the world doesn't owe him a living. Rossi's report on the passenger seat detailed the rest of the fallout. Madison was living in a studio apartment above a garage 3 towns over. She had tried to get a job at a boutique, but word had spread. The video of her screaming at the party had circulated in the local social circles. She was radioactive. She was currently working the night shift at a diner serving coffee to truckers who didn't care about her last name. Frank and Betsy had lost the Connecticut house. The bank took it. The cars were repossessed. They were living with Betsy's sister in a trailer park in Florida. Frank was facing indictment for the fraud at his construction company. He would likely spend his twilight years in a federal prison. The divorce papers had been filed 2 weeks ago. Terrence and Madison didn't fight over assets because there were no assets. They fought over debt. They fought over who was more to blame. It was a messy end to a transactional marriage. I put the car in gear. I looked at my son one last time. He was wiping down the windshield of the minivan. He looked tired. He looked broken. But he also looked real. For the first time in his life, he was dealing with reality. Maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10, he would be a man worth knowing. But that was his journey to walk. I had carried him long enough. I drove away, leaving the car wash behind. I had a meeting with my new foundation directors. We were setting up a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids who wanted to study engineering, kids who knew the value of hard work, kids who wouldn't throw a gift away. That evening I returned to the lodge. The snow had melted, revealing the green shoots of early spring pushing through the earth. The air was fresh and clean. I walked into the great room. It was different now. The tacky white rug was gone. The chrome bar with the purple lights was in a dumpster somewhere. My old leather chairs were back in their places, worn and comfortable. But the most important change was in the corner by the east window. It had taken Rossi 3 days to track it down. The scrapper Terrence had sold it to hadn't stripped it yet. He knew the value of what he had, even if my son didn't. I had to pay 10 times what Terrence sold it for to get it back, but it was worth every penny. The Steinway Model B sat there gleaming in the firelight. It was black and beautiful and silent, waiting for a touch. I walked over to it. I ran my hand along the curve of the wood. It was cold and smooth. I sat down on the bench. It groaned slightly, a familiar sound that welcomed me home. I lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys. They were ivory and ebony, a perfect smile. I hesitated. My hands were old. My fingers were stiff from the cold and from the years. But the music was still there inside me. I closed my eyes. I thought of Coretta. I thought of the painting she made of this mountain, the one I had rescued from the shed and rehung above the fireplace. I thought of the years we spent building this life brick by brick, deal by deal. I pressed my fingers to the keys. I played the first chord of Misty. The sound filled the room, rich and resonant. It bounced off the timber beams and settled into the stone hearth. It was the sound of history. It was the sound of love. I played for an hour. I played until my fingers ached. I played until the sun went down and the moon rose over the ridge. I poured myself a glass of wine. My wine. From my cellar. I sat in my leather chair and watched the fire dance. I was alone in the massive house. But I didn't feel the emptiness I had feared. I felt light. The heavy burden of carrying dead weight was gone. The anxiety of wondering if my son loved me or my money was gone. I had the answer. It was a painful answer, but it was the truth. and the truth is the only foundation you can build a real life on. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like victory. I had reclaimed my home. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had taught a lesson that would echo down the generations. Never underestimate the man who built the mountain just because he chooses to walk humbly upon it. If you enjoyed this story of justice and reclamation, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. And let me know in the comments if you would have given them a ride down the mountain or if you would have made them walk too. Until next time, keep your head up, keep your eyes open, and never let anyone treat you like a bottom feeder in your own house. This is Winston Calloway signing off. This experience taught me that blood does not guarantee loyalty, and silence does not mean weakness. For years, I hid my success to protect my son, hoping he would value character over currency. Instead, I watched greed hollow him out until he was unrecognizable. We often think that love means shielding people from the cold, but sometimes the greatest act of love is letting them freeze so they learn to build their own fire. I reclaimed my dignity not by shouting, but by quietly removing the support they took for granted. Never let anyone, not even family, make you feel like a guest in your own life. If you believe respect must be earned, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. Let me know in the comments, would you have forgiven Terrence or was the snow his best teacher?